Metropolis burned in silence. Not the roaring inferno of an active disaster, but the dull ember glow of a city that had learned to smolder. Ash drifted through the streets like snow that would never melt. Steel girders jutted from collapsed towers at angles geometry had abandoned. Glass crunched underfoot in every alley ground so fine that it glittered like frost beneath the streetlights that still worked. This was year 4 of the regime. The world had grown accustomed to the weight. In a crater 3 blocks wide, the remnants of what had been a residential district sat empty. Water pooled in the depression, reflecting the red sky. No rescue crews worked here anymore. No sirens wailed. The people who had lived in these buildings were statistics, now archived in databases Superman consulted when he needed to remember why he had chosen this path. At the crater's edge, 7 people huddled around a broken water main. They moved with the jerky efficiency of those who had learned that hesitation meant death. A woman with burn scars covering half her face filled plastic bottles. A man missing 3 fingers held them steady. Between them, a teenage boy kept watch eyes scanning the sky for the red and blue that meant judgment. The boy saw the flash first. Not Superman. Not heat vision or a descending god. This light came from below, from inside the crater, itself tearing upward through reality like a wound, opening in reverse. The air split with a sound that was not sound, a frequency that existed in the space between atoms, and the water in the depression began to boil. The 7 scattered. The bottles fell. Water hissed against superheated concrete. The rift stabilized into a vertical slash of impossible colors, hues that human eyes rejected but could not unsee. Through it, reality bled. Not the structured, comprehensible reality of Earth, but something older. Something that operated on principles this universe had never ratified. 2 figures stepped through. The first appeared human. Slight build, soft features, hair the color of shallow water. The kind of person who would disappear in a crowd if crowds still gathered in Metropolis. But the way the figure moved, unhurried, unbothered by the ash in the air, or the heat radiating from the rift, suggested something had been misplaced in the translation between appearance and essence. The second wore the bearing of old aristocracy. Tall, immaculate dark suit that had no place in a war zone. Gloves so white they seemed to glow against the gray landscape. When this one stepped onto the cracked pavement, the motion carried the precision of a butler entering a drawing room, not a stranger arriving in a crater. Behind them, the rift collapsed. The impossible colors drained away. The air stopped screaming. Rimuru Tempest surveyed the ruins with the calm of someone reading a particularly dense technical manual. The blue-haired figure's gaze swept across the destruction, not searching for threats, but cataloging variables. Structural integrity, population density, energy signatures in the atmosphere. The assessment took 3 seconds. The conclusions were filed away without comment. Diablo inclined his head in a shallow bow, though no one remained nearby to receive it. When he straightened, his red eyes tracked the fleeing survivors with the interest a sommelier might show toward an unfamiliar vintage. What a delightfully bitter flavor this world carries, Diablo observed. His voice held the warmth of a funeral director offering condolences. Fear has been cultivated here with considerable expertise. Rimuru explained nothing. The figures stood perfectly still, processing. The air around them had begun to shift, responding to something that existed outside the normal framework of cause and effect. Space bent slightly, not enough to see, just enough to feel wrong. Analysis complete, a voice said, though no one had spoken aloud. CL's presence manifested as pure information, a consciousness that existed in the architecture of Rimuru's mind. Dimensional coordinates do not match any known universe. Energy signatures suggest reality has been restructured by directed force. Multiple probability streams have collapsed into a single enforced outcome. Conclusion: this world is under active management. Managed by whom? Rimuru's thought was precise, clinical. Insufficient data. However, the pattern is consistent with authoritarian control structures. Fear as a governance mechanism. Hope as a regulated resource. Across the city, alarms began to wail. Not the civilian warning systems, those had been offline for months. These were military sirens, the kind that meant something had penetrated the regime's sensor grid. Something that registered as a threat significant enough to warrant immediate response. Diablo tilted his head, listening to the distant chaos with the contentment of a musician hearing a familiar melody. It appears we have attracted attention, Rimuru-sama. How would you prefer to proceed? Before Rimuru could answer, the sky tore open. Not with the alien wrongness of the rift that had delivered them here, but with the brutal simplicity of overwhelming force. The sound came first, a sonic boom that shattered every remaining window for 6 blocks. Then the shockwave, a wall of compressed air that would have killed anyone still foolish enough to be watching. Superman descended like divine wrath, wearing a cape. He hit the ground between them and the crater's edge with enough force to crack the pavement in a perfect radial pattern. The impact sent up a cloud of dust and ash that hung in the air like a gray curtain. When it cleared, the Man of Steel stood upright, arms at his sides, expression carved from granite. This was not the Superman of legend. The eyes that swept across Rimuru and Diablo carried no warmth, no hope, no faith in humanity's better nature. They were the eyes of a man who had made a choice and would never forgive himself for being right. Identify yourselves, Superman said. Not a request. A documentation requirement before the execution. Rimuru studied the Kryptonian with the same detached interest CL brought to energy readings. Watched the micro-expressions, the stance, the way Superman's hands flexed slightly at his sides. This was a fighter who had forgotten how to stop fighting. Who had convinced himself that the only way to prevent tragedy was to become its administrator. Rimuru Tempest, the blue-haired figure said. The name carried no weight, no context, no implied threat, just information. We did not choose to arrive here. That's what they all say. Superman's heat vision began to build twin points of red light gathering in his eyes like stars preparing to go nova. Before the invasion, before the attack, before everything goes wrong, you'll tell me you're not a threat. You'll tell me you want peace. The light intensified. The air between them began to shimmer with heat. And then, Metropolis burns again. Diablo's smile widened by exactly 1 degree. Not mockery. Professional appreciation. How fascinating, the dark-suited figure murmured. This one has embraced despair so thoroughly that he wears it like armor. Superman moved. Faster than sound, faster than thought. The kind of speed that turned physics into a polite suggestion. His fist drove toward Rimuru's face with enough force behind it to level a building. The punch would connect in 0.003 of a second. There would be no dodge, no block, no survival. The punch stopped, not because Superman chose to stop, not because something blocked it. The fist just ceased to possess momentum, as if the universe had examined at the concept of kinetic energy and decided it was optional. Rimuru had not moved, had not raised a hand. had barely acknowledged the attack beyond a slight tilt of the head. "Violence will not function here," Rimuru explained. The voice was quiet, conversational, the tone one might use to explain why a door was locked. "Not because I forbid it, because the space around us no longer recognizes it as a valid interaction." Superman tried again. Faster this time, from a different angle, adding heat vision to the strike. The beams that could melt steel, vaporize concrete, burn through anything on Earth. They touched Rimuru's shoulder and dissipated like morning fog. Interesting. Ciel observed her presence, a constant hum beneath Rimuru's thoughts. Solar radiation converted to thermal energy redirected through biological focusing mechanisms. Crude but effective for baseline physics. Naturally, it cannot affect structures operating on information-theoretic principles. Superman stepped back. His expression had not changed, but something in his posture had shifted from execution to assessment. This was the moment where the dictator recognized a problem that could not be solved with force. "What are you?" "A visitor," Rimuru replied. "One who did not request passage to this world. Your rift brought us here war resonance, unless I am mistaken. An attempt to weaponize divine conflict by linking Olympian pathways to something called boom tube technology." The casual dissection of classified information made Superman's jaw tighten. He had not mentioned Olympus, had not spoken of Ares or the escalating divine interference that had been plaguing the regime for months. "You know too much," Superman said. "I know what this place has become," Rimuru answered. "A world where peace means fear, where safety requires surrender, where the strongest man alive has convinced himself that the only way to prevent suffering is to manufacture it in controlled doses." The words landed like physical blows. Superman had heard criticism before, had weathered judgment from Batman, from Wonder Woman's increasingly uncomfortable silence, from the ghosts that visited him when he tried to sleep. But this was not criticism. This was diagnosis. "You don't understand," Superman said, and for the first time something other than cold certainty entered his voice. "You weren't here. You didn't see what happens when we let them choose, when we trust them to do the right thing. They chose Joker. They chose war. They chose extinction. And so you chose for them," Rimuru said. "Not accusation, observation. I chose survival." Across the city, emergency channels crackled to life. Regime forces were mobilizing. Satellites had captured footage of the rift, of the two unknown entities, of Superman's failed attempt to eliminate the threat. Within minutes, every meta-human asset within 50 miles would converge on this crater. Diablo glanced skyward, tracking trajectories that most eyes could not perceive. "We are about to have company, Rimuru-sama. Shall I handle the introductions?" "No." The blue-haired figure finally moved, turning to face the direction from which the reinforcements would arrive. "If violence is their first language, let's teach them a second." The air around the crater began to change. Not violently, not dramatically. Just a subtle shift in the fundamental rules, as if reality itself had been presented with a new set of operating instructions and decided they made more sense than the old ones. Superman felt it immediately. His enhanced senses registered the alteration the way a musician might notice a piano slightly out of tune. The world had not become hostile. It had merely stopped agreeing with the assumption that force was inevitable. "What did you do?" "Created a boundary," Rimuru explained. "A space where your war cannot enter, where violence exhausts itself against logic that refuses to validate it. Think of it as a law, not imposed through strength, but through fundamental redefinition of what is possible. Above them, the first of Superman's reinforcements arrived. Flash moving at speeds that turned him into a crimson blur. Green Lantern ring already constructing siege weaponry. Wonder Woman's sword drawn face set in the grim determinations of a warrior who had learned to stop asking whether the cause was just. They descended toward the crater like falling stars, and stopped. Not because they chose to, not because something blocked them. They directly found that forward momentum had become an abstract concept, intellectually comprehensible, but physically unachievable. Flash tried to vibrate through the barrier. The speed force, that infinite well of kinetic impossibility, touched Rimuru's boundary and discovered that infinity was a relative term. Green Lantern's constructs shattered like glass against stone. Wonder Woman's sword, forged by gods blessed by truth itself, struck the invisible line and rang like a bell that had never been cast to sound. Superman stood in the center of the crater, surrounded by his most powerful allies, facing two strangers who had just demonstrated that everything the regime was built upon: strength, superiority, the simple mathematics of overwhelming force, was negotiable. Rimuru watched them struggle against the boundary with the patience of someone observing a scientific experiment. No satisfaction in their failure, no glee, just data collection. "Your world is broken," Rimuru responded, and the words carried across the crater despite being spoken at conversational volume. Not through malice, through the choice to prioritize order over consent. "You have built peace on a foundation of fear, and now you are trapped maintaining that fear forever, because the moment it falters, the structure collapses." "Then what would you have us do?" Wonder Woman called out, voice sharp with frustration. "Stand aside while chaos consumes everything we fought to protect." "I would have you stop," Rimuru replied. "Not abandon responsibility. Not surrender to disorder. Simply stop building cages and calling them safety. Stop deciding for others what they are allowed to risk." The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished fire. Around the crater, regime forces continued to arrive, forming a perimeter that meant nothing against a boundary that rejected the premise of conflict. Diablo surveyed the assembled heroes with the benign interest of a gardener, inspecting particularly aggressive weeds. "Shall I demonstrate what happens when peace becomes indistinguishable from imprisonment?" he asked, one white-gloved hand rising in a gesture that promised education through suffering. "No," Rimuru said again, quieter this time. "Not yet. They need to understand before they can choose." Superman's fists remained clenched at his sides. The man of steel who had decided that the price of hope was too high, that trust was a luxury this world could no longer afford. The dictator who woke every morning and chose fear because the alternative, the possibility that he had broken the world while trying to save it, was unthinkable. "You can't stay here," Superman said finally. Not a threat, a statement of fact. "This world is under my protection, under regime law. Whatever you or whatever rules you think apply, they end at Earth's atmosphere. Then we have a problem. Because I cannot leave. The rift that brought us here collapsed, and even if I could find a way back, I would not abandon a world to its own destruction just because that destruction has learned to wear a cape." The boundary expanded, not aggressively, just a patient widening like dawn spreading across a landscape that had forgotten what sunrise looked like. Where it passed, regime soldiers found their weapons inert, their armor decorative, their certainty negotiable. And in the heart of the crater, Rimuru Tempest stood perfectly still, a small figure who had just informed the most powerful beings on Earth that their permission was irrelevant. Somewhere in the ruins beyond the crater, the 7 survivors who had scattered when the rift opened watched from behind broken walls. They saw Superman rendered impotent. They saw the regime stopped cold. They saw something that Year 4 had taught them was impossible. They saw resistance that worked. The woman with the burn scars picked up one of the fallen water bottles. Her hands shook less than they had in months. The man with missing fingers met her eyes. The teenage boy stopped watching the sky. Above the crater, storm clouds gathered. Not natural weather. The atmospheric consequences of gods paying attention. Olympus had felt the rift's creation, had sensed the arrival of something that refused to bow to the rules of this dying earth. And in the shadows between worlds, Ares smiled. War had always been his domain, fear his currency. But this watching one absolute meet another, watching Superman face an enemy he could not punch, watching despair collide with something that merely refused to participate in its logic. This was artistry. The god of war leaned forward in his seat beyond perception and whispered orders that would never bear his signature. Let them build their sanctuary. Let them believe in safety. Let hope take root in soil that had been salted with surrender. And then show them how thoroughly hope burns. In the crater, Rimuru sensed the attention. Felt the weight of divine focus settling across the boundary like frost on glass. Sael processed the anomaly, instantly categorizing it as hostile intent wrapped in patience. We are being observed, the Manus reported. Source extra-dimensional, intent malicious. Conclusion: this arrival was not accident. Someone wanted us here. Of course they did, Rimuru thought back. War feeds on variables, on hope meeting despair, on new pieces entering a stalemate. We are exactly what this world's conflict required to escalate. Recommendation: let them watch, Rimuru decided. Every manipulator reveals themselves in how they manipulate. We will learn more from being the bait than from hiding. The boundary settled into permanence. Not a barrier anymore, but a new law of physics specific to this location. Inside its radius, violence had become a theoretical concept. Outside, the regime gathered its forces and contemplated the mathematics of siege warfare against an enemy that rejected warfare's axioms. Superman turned away. The motion carried defeat in every line, though his face remained stone. This isn't over, he said. No, Rimuru agreed. It's just beginning. The question is whether it ends with understanding, or with everyone too exhausted to remember why they fought. The Man of Steel lifted off a streak of red and blue against gray clouds. His reinforcements followed, leaving the crater empty except for 2 visitors who had just declared themselves beyond jurisdiction. Diablo watched them depart with the satisfaction of a chess player who had just forced an opening gambit. They will return, he noted. They will, Rimuru confirmed. With plans, with strategies. With every weapon they believe can solve a problem force couldn't answer. They will try to break this boundary to prove that nothing exists beyond their ability to destroy. And when they fail, then they will have a choice. Learn that their power has limits, or continue escalating until those limits destroy them. The first refugees began to approach the crater's edge. Cautious, disbelieving, testing the boundary with the wariness of people who had learned that sanctuary was always a trap waiting to spring. The woman with burn scars stepped through first. The boundary accepted her. Inside its radius, the weight she had carried for 4 years, the constant vigilance, the perpetual fear, the exhaustion of survival, under a regime that called terror, peace lifted. She collapsed to her knees and wept. Others followed. The man with missing fingers, the teenage boy. Dozens more crawling from ruins that had been their prisons, drawn by the impossible promise that somewhere violence had simply stopped working. Rimuru watched them come, watched hope return to faces that had forgotten its shape, watched people remember that they were allowed to stop being afraid, and understood with the clarity that Ciel brought to all analysis exactly what trap had just been set. This boundary protected them now, gave them safety, made them believe that resistance was possible, which meant that when it failed, when someone found the crack, when the breach came, when violence inevitably discovered the loophole, the fall would be absolute. Hope made excellent kindling. Rimuru looked at Diablo. The dark-suited figure returned the gaze with perfect understanding. "We are not the only players in this game," Rimuru answered quietly. "Indeed," Diablo agreed. "But we are the only ones who have noticed we are playing." The boundary held. The refugees continued to arrive, and somewhere in the divine spaces between reality's seams, Ares watched his board and planned his next move. Year 4 had just become more interesting. The boundary grew, not through expansion or conquest, but through invitation. Word spread through the broken streets of Metropolis. The way rumors had always spread in occupied territories, whispered between those who had learned to trust. Nothing confirmed only after multiple witnesses swore to the same impossible story. There was a place where Superman's gaze meant nothing, where heat vision dissipated like morning dew, where the regime's armor became costume jewelry and its weapons decorative sculpture. By dawn, 300 people had crossed into what they were already calling sanctuary. Rimuru stood at the crater's center and watched them arrive. Each refugee carried the same wariness, the same test-the-waters caution of prey, entering what might be another predator's territory. They touched the invisible line with trembling hands, stepped through with held breath, waited for the trap to spring. It never did. The blue-haired figure observed their reactions with the detachment of someone documenting natural phenomena. Fear bleeding into confusion. Confusion giving way to cautious relief. Relief hardening into something more dangerous, the beginning of belief. "They do not trust the safety," Ciel noted. "Psychological scarring is extensive. Cortisol levels remain elevated despite absence of immediate threat. They have been conditioned to expect punishment for hope." "Then we give them time," Rimuru thought back. "Healing cannot be forced. It can only be offered." A woman approached. Not the one with burn scars from yesterday, though she lingered nearby protective, but someone older, gray-haired, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints remembered better days. She stopped 3 feet from Rimuru and studied the figure with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. "What do you want?" she asked. No preamble, no gratitude. Just the question everyone had been afraid to voice. To understand why this world chose to die standing rather than live kneeling, Rimuru answered. And why, having made that choice, it kneels anyway. The woman's laugh was dry as ash. "We kneel because the alternative is Metropolis. Again. Different city, same mathematics. Superman decides someone is too dangerous. Wonder Woman agrees. Flash executes the sentence before you can blink." She met Rimuru's gaze without flinching. "So I ask again. What do you want from us? Nothing. You may stay as long as you choose. You may leave when you wish. The only rule is this: violence does not function here. Not against others. Not against yourself. Not even in thought made manifest. That's it. No loyalty oath, no pledge to overthrow the regime." "I am not building an army," Rimuru replied. "I am offering a choice. Stay or go. Live or return to survival. The decision is yours to make and yours to own. The woman stared for a long moment, then nodded once and walked away, each step carrying less weight than the last. Others began to test the boundaries, literal and metaphorical. A young man tried to start a fight over water rations. His fist stopped mid-swing, momentum directly ceasing to exist. He stood there, arm frozen, until embarrassment made him lower it. No one laughed. They all understood what he had been testing. Whether this was real, whether they were allowed to stop fighting each other, whether peace meant anything beyond the absence of immediate death. Diablo materialized from shadow at Rimuru's side. The dark-suited figure watched the growing population with the interest of someone observing bacteria under a microscope. "They are fragile," he observed. 4 years of terror has reduced them to reflexes. Remove the threat, and they do not know how to be human anymore. "Then we remind them," Rimuru answered quietly. "And when Superman returns, when he brings the full weight of his regime to crush this defiance, he will find that defiance is the wrong word. We are not opposing him. We are merely existing in a space where his rules do not apply." Diablo's smile held professional appreciation. Passive resistance elevated to fundamental law. How delightfully frustrating for someone who only speaks the language of force. The shadows at the crater's edge moved wrong. Not the natural darkness of night falling, but shadow that moved against the light that pooled where it should not, that carried weight beyond the absence of illumination. Diablo straightened. Rimuru's eyes narrowed. Batman emerged from the impossible darkness like a knife drawn from a sheath. He did not walk into sanctuary, did not test the boundary. Plainly stood at the threshold, cowl hiding everything but a jawline, tight with tension, and studied the scene with the focus of someone cataloging evidence. The refugees noticed him. Scattered, found corners to hide in alcoves to vanish into. 4 years had taught them that Batman meant interrogation, meant information extracted, meant consequences for knowing too much or too little. But he made no move to enter, made no demands, just watched. Rimuru turned to face him fully. Across 30 feet of broken ground, 2 strategists assessed each other with the cold precision of chess masters studying an unfamiliar opening. "You are not Superman," Rimuru said. Statement, not question. "No." Batman agreed. His voice carried the rasp of someone who had ground his ideals against reality until both were scarred. "I'm the one who remembers what we used to stand for." Insurgency, CL supplied. Resistance movement, limited resources, operates through information warfare and strategic sabotage rather than direct confrontation. Probability: this individual is here to assess threat level and potential alliance value. Tall. "You can walk through," Rimuru offered. "The boundary does not discriminate. It only judges intent. And if my intent is hostile, then you will find yourself unable to act on it. Not restrained, not punished, only existing in a space where hostility has no purchase." Batman considered this. His hand rested near his utility belt, not reaching for it, just confirming its presence. A fighter's reflex. "How does it work?" he asked. "The barrier. I've seen force fields, energy shields, mother box technology. This is none of those." "Because it is not a barrier," Rimuru explained. "It is a redefinition. Inside this radius, cause and effect have been reminded that violence is a choice, not a certainty. The universe here merely declines to cooperate with harm. Physics doesn't work that way." "Your physics," Rimuru corrected gently. I follow rules written elsewhere. Batman's jaw tightened. Someone who built their entire methodology on understanding systems, on knowing the rules well enough to exploit them, facing a system that rejected his axioms entirely. "Why are you here?" he asked. "And don't tell me it was an accident. Nothing about you suggests randomness." "We were brought here," Rimuru responded. "Through a dimensional rupture, someone attempting to weaponize the connection between Olympus and Apocalypse. War resonance, divine conflict, harmonics linked to boom tube frequencies." Batman processed this information with visible effort. "Ares, most likely. And now you're building, what, a resistance cell? A staging ground. A reminder that people are allowed to exist without choosing between tyranny and chaos. That there are spaces where neither Superman's order nor your rebellion is required. Where they can directly be." Batman's silence stretched. Behind him, the ruins of Metropolis burned with the slow ember glow of a city that had learned to smolder. Before him, refugees moved through sanctuary with the tentative steps of prisoners, remembering how to walk without chains. "You're going to get them killed," Batman said finally. Not accusation. Warning. Superman crushes hope, systematically. You're gathering targets. "And you?" Rimuru asked. "What do you offer them?" "A resistance that operates from shadows, that strikes and vanishes, that changes nothing fundamental. How many have died for your insurgency while the regime grows stronger?" The words landed like physical blows. Batman's fists clenched. "We do what we can with what we have." "Then do it better," Rimuru said. "No heat, no judgment, just observation. You fight Superman on his terms, violence against violence, strategy against strategy. You cannot win because the game is rigged by its premise that power determines right. Change the premise." "To what?" "To consent," Rimuru replied. "Superman rules through fear of what he might do. You resist through fear of what he will do. Both of you have forgotten that there is a third option, people who merely refuse to participate in fear's economy." Batman stepped forward. One step. Testing. The boundary accepted him. He froze mid-stride, feeling it. The shift, the weightlifting, the constant tactical awareness. Where were the exits? What were the weapons? How would the fight unfold, quieting to a whisper instead of a scream? Batman had not felt safe in 4 years. He had not realized how much that cost until the debt was lifted. "This is..." He stopped, started again. "How are you maintaining this? The energy requirements alone." "There is no maintenance. Once established, the law sustains itself, like gravity, like time. It plainly is." "Nothing just is," Batman said. The detective in him refused the answer. "Everything has a mechanism, a weakness." "Yes," Rimuru agreed. "And when someone finds it, everyone here will be vulnerable. That is the risk they accept by choosing safety over vigilance." Batman studied at the refugees, at people sleeping without keeping one eye open, at children playing instead of hiding. "You're giving them something to lose," he said quietly. "Or perhaps they will remember that safety was possible, that they deserved it, and that memory will make them dangerous, not to others, but to the systems that require their fear." Diablo had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now he spoke, voice carrying the warmth of winter frost. "You are afraid," he observed. "Not of Superman, not of the regime. You fear that this might work, that people might choose safety over your righteous struggle." Batman's hand moved toward his belt. Stopped. The boundary had not prevented the motion, but something else had the realization that violence here was not just impossible, but inappropriate, like screaming in a library. "I need to know," Batman said, voice tight. "Are you here to help us or replace us?" "Neither," Rimuru answered. "We are here because someone decided this world needed more chaos. We are staying because leaving would abandon people to the consequences of a choice we did not make. What happens next is not predetermined." "But you have a plan." "I have an observation," Rimuru corrected. "This world is caught between two absolutes: Superman's forced order and the chaos he claims to prevent. Both positions assume violence is the fundamental language of power. I am suggesting a third grammar exists." Batman studied the blue-haired figure for a long moment. Tactical assessment giving way to something more complex. Recognition that he was talking to someone who saw patterns he had missed, who operated on principles he had never considered. "Who oversees you?" Batman asked. The question every strategist asked when facing unknown power. "Who checks you when you decide to stop being neutral?" "No one can," Rimuru said, honest, unflinching. "Which means I must check myself, constantly, without mercy. The moment I believe I cannot be wrong is the moment I become what I oppose." The answer landed in the space between them, like a bridge or a chasm, depending on interpretation. "I've heard that before," Batman said. "From someone who used to wear your certainty like armor, right before he started killing people to save them." "Then watch me," Rimuru invited. "Stay in Sanctuary, observe how we operate, document every decision. And the moment you see me becoming what Superman became, the moment consent becomes coercion, you will know what to do." "I'll destroy you," Batman said. "Not threat. Promise." "Good," Rimuru replied. "Someone should be prepared to. Power without accountability is just tyranny with better publicity." Something shifted in Batman's posture. Not trust, he was incapable of that anymore, but something adjacent to it. Recognition that whoever this blue-haired stranger was, they understood the fundamental problem better than most. "Superman will come for this place," Batman warned. "Not with threats, with siege. He'll starve you out, cut supply lines, make the cost of Sanctuary higher than these people can bear." "Then we adapt," Rimuru responded. "Water can be purified. Food can be grown. Air does not require his permission. And if he attempts to weaponize basic survival, if he reveals that his peace requires starvation as enforcement, he will answer a question this world has been afraid to ask." "What question?" "Whether he is actually interested in protecting people or just controlling them." Batman processed this, turned, took 3 steps toward the boundary's edge, stopped. "If someone comes asking to enter Sanctuary," he said without turning around, "someone quiet, scared, carrying information about regime troop movements, send them through. We'll handle it from there. Not alliance, not endorsement, just acknowledgement that Sanctuary could serve a purpose beyond shelter." Batman vanished into shadows that should not have been deep enough to hide him. Diablo watched the empty space where he had stood with professional interest. "That one has perfected the art of theatrical exits. I almost approve." "He will test us," Rimuru observed, "constantly, looking for the moment we become what we claim to oppose. And if we pass his tests, he will invent harder ones. Paranoia is his armor. But beneath it, I think he is very tired." The night deepened. More refugees arrived, guided by whispers and desperate hope. By midnight, Sanctuary held 500 souls. By dawn, it would be 1,000. Word was spreading faster than the regime could suppress it. Somewhere in the ruins, a figure watched the crater's glow. Not regime surveillance, not insurgency reconnaissance. The attention carried a different quality. Older patient waited with divine calculation. Magic tasted the air around Sanctuary's edges, probing, without touching, learning rhythms that mortal technology could never detect. Testing the boundary not with force, but with observation. Mapping its weaknesses, inside Sanctuary, Sayel processed anomalous data. "We are being observed," she reported to Rimuru. "Third party, unknown affiliation. Recommendation, investigate." Not yet. Rimuru thought back. Let them watch, let them plan. We learn more from how they approach than from stopping them before they begin. Risk assessment elevated. Acknowledged, Rimuru agreed. But unavoidable. We offered safety. That means accepting the consequences when someone tries to weaponize it. Diablo materialized at the boundary's edge, facing the direction CL had indicated. His red eyes tracked movement invisible to baseline perception. "Shall I introduce myself to our voyeur?" he asked. The question was polite. The offer was not. No. Let them believe they are undetected. Paranoia makes people predictable. As you wish. Diablo agreed, though something in his tone suggested he would have enjoyed the alternative. The night continued. Fires burned low. People slept without nightmares for the first time in years. Children dreamed of futures that might actually arrive. And in the spaces between, plans formed. Schemes developed, strategies coalesced around the simple fact that something new had entered this dying world's equation. Something that believed consent mattered more than compliance. Batman stood on a rooftop 3 blocks from Sanctuary and composed a message to the insurgency's encrypted network. Anomaly confirmed. Capabilities reality manipulation, non-violent containment. Threat level indeterminate. Recommendation observe. Do not engage unless provoked. Secondary note may represent alternative to current stalemate. Requires further assessment. He sent the message, watched Sanctuary's distant glow, and wondered if he was looking at hope or just another well-intentioned road to hell. They came at 3 a.m. 6 operatives in tactical gear that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. No insignias, no identifiable markers. The kind of soldiers who existed in classified budgets and unmarked graves. They approached Sanctuary from downwind, using debris for cover, moving with the practiced silence of people who killed for governments. Their mission parameters were simple: infiltrate, assess capabilities, extract information about the anomaly's weaknesses. Secondary objective: plant surveillance equipment. Tertiary, if opportunity presented itself, eliminate the blue-haired target. They reached the perimeter at 0317 hours. Squad leader, callsign Hammer, signaled halt. Thermal scans showed refugees sleeping in clusters. No sentries, no patrol patterns, just people resting like they believed tomorrow would arrive. Fools. Hammer gestured forward. The squad moved as one organism, weapons ready, every angle covered. Professional, disciplined. They had done this 100 times in 100 resistance cells. The first operative stepped through the invisible line. His rifle stopped working. Not jammed, not disabled. The firing mechanism simply refused to acknowledge the existence of ammunition. The trigger pulled, but nothing followed. No click, no resistance, just the metal completing a motion that led nowhere. The operative froze. Tried again. Checked the magazine by muscle memory. Everything appeared functional. Nothing functioned. Behind him, the other 5 crossed the threshold. Their weapons died in sequence. Grenades became paperweights. Taser contacts generated nothing. Even the combat knives, simple steel that had worked since the Bronze Age, felt wrong in their hands, as if the concept of edges had become negotiable. Hammer made the abort signal. They turned to retreat. Diablo stood between them and the exit. He had not walked up, had not emerged from cover, only existed where he had not existed moments before, as if space had forgotten he was supposed to travel between points. The dark suit remained immaculate despite the ash. White gloves caught what little moonlight penetrated the cloud cover. His smile was warm, welcoming the expression a host might wear when greeting unexpected dinner guests. "Good evening, gentlemen," Diablo said. The voice carried impeccable diction, each syllable precise as a scalpel. "I must apologize for the inconvenience, but I'm afraid your equipment has encountered a philosophical disagreement with local regulations. Violence, you see, is considered rather poor form here." Hammer's hand signals came fast. Formation Delta, combat spacing. Prepare for close quarters. The squad moved with trained precision. 3 flanked left, 2 right. Hammer center. Classic encirclement. They had disabled metahumans before. Strength meant nothing against proper tactics. They closed the circle. Diablo did not move, did not tense, just watched them approach with the benign interest of someone observing particularly determined ants. The first operative swung. A haymaker with full body weight behind it, the kind of punch that could shatter jaws. The fist stopped 3 inches from Diablo's face. Not blocked, not caught. The space between knuckles and target simply refused to decrease, as if distance had decided 6 inches was close enough and would not be negotiated with. 5 more strikes came in sequence. Kicks. Elbow strikes. A headbutt from the operative behind. Each attack froze at the same radius, creating a sphere of frustrated momentum around Diablo's perfectly still form. "How industrious," Diablo observed. "Though I wonder at what point does persistence become tedium, shall we say, now?" He raised one gloved hand, did not touch them, did not need to. The operatives collapsed like marionettes with cut strings. Not unconscious worse. Awake, aware, completely unable to command their bodies to move. Paralysis delivered with surgical precision, each nerve pathway plainly informed that voluntary motion was no longer among its available options. Diablo crouched beside Hammer, who lay on his back staring at stars he could not remember seeing clearly in years. The red eyes that met his held no malice. Just profound, almost clinical curiosity. "Let us have a conversation," Diablo suggested. "Nothing unpleasant, I assure you. Simply an exchange of information between professionals. You came here with questions. I have questions of my own. A trade seems equitable." Hammer tried to speak, found he could. Whatever had paralyzed his body had left his voice intact, a courtesy or a cruelty, depending on interpretation. "Go to hell," he managed. "I appreciate the sentiment," Diablo replied. "But I'm afraid geography is not my concern at present. What does interest me is the architecture of your command structure. Who authorized this incursion? Through what channels were your orders transmitted? What infrastructure supports your operations?" "Classified," Hammer spat. "Naturally," Diablo agreed. "Though I suspect we both understand that classification is merely organizational etiquette, not a binding metaphysical law." He placed one gloved finger against Hammer's temple. Gentle, almost tender. "I could extract what I need," Diablo continued conversationally. Reach into the architecture of your thoughts and pluck answers like fruit from a tree. It would be efficient, thorough, deeply unpleasant for you naturally, but effective. However, he withdrew the hand. My employer has requested I demonstrate restraint. Imagine my disappointment. Hammer's breathing came faster, fear response kicking in despite training. Some part of his hindbrain recognized what stood above him, predator in human configuration, playing at civility the way a cat might toy with wounded prey. So instead, we negotiate. Diablo proposed. Tell me what I wish to know, and I return you to your masters intact. Refuse, and I am forced to conduct a more invasive inquiry. Your choice. I do so enjoy when people have choices. Silence stretched. Around them, the other 5 operatives lay motionless, listening, calculating whether their squad leader would break. Diablo stood, walked to the next operative, crouched with the same precise courtesy. Perhaps you are more communicative, he suggested to the woman whose call sign was Raptor. I notice you carry 3 different communication devices. Redundancy suggests importance. Who were you meant to contact upon mission completion? Raptor's eyes darted to Hammer, back to Diablo. Training said resist. Survival said talk. We report to Central Command, she said. Encrypted channels, rotating frequencies. That's all I know. A beginning, Diablo acknowledged. Though I suspect there is more. Central Command. Coordinates multiple cells, yes. How many teams are tasked with sanctuary surveillance? Raptor, shut it, Hammer barked. Diablo turned back to him with exaggerated patience. Leadership is such a burden. Is it not responsible for maintaining discipline even while completely immobilized on hostile ground? Exhausting. He addressed the group at large. Let me clarify the situation. You are not prisoners of war. You are not hostages. You are directly individuals who made poor tactical decisions and are now experiencing educational consequences. The lesson concludes when I understand your organizational structure. How quickly we arrive at that understanding depends entirely on your cooperation. Another operative call sign Blade spoke up, young, newer to the regime than the others, still believed in absolutes. You're monsters, Blade said, pretending to be peaceful while you torture. Has anyone been tortured? Diablo interrupted mildly. I see paralysis, inconvenience, a certain loss of dignity. But torture requires intentional infliction of suffering for its own sake. I am merely conducting an interview under circumstances that encourage honesty. Semantics, Blade spat. Precision, Diablo corrected. I could demonstrate the difference if you like. Show you what torture actually entails when performed by someone with genuine expertise. The offer hung in the air like smoke. No, a new voice said. Rimuru approached from the direction of the crater. The blue-haired figure moved with unhurried steps, each footfall deliberate. Stopped beside Diablo and looked down at the paralyzed operatives with the same analytical gaze used for everything else. You were instructed to gather information, Rimuru said to Diablo. Not to enjoy the process. I am merely being thorough, Rimuru-sama, Diablo replied, though he stepped back from Blade. These gentlemen arrived with hostile intent. Protocol suggests efficiency, not theater. Rimuru interrupted. Studied at the squad. What are your names? Silence. Not your call signs. Your names. The ones your families used before the regime taught you to be weapons. More silence. Then Hammer voice rough. Marcus. One by one the others followed. Sarah, James, Chen, Rodriguez, Kenji. Thank you. I am Rimuru Tempest. This is Diablo. We did not invite you here, but now that you have arrived, I would like to understand why. Orders, Marcus said flatly. From whom? Does it matter? Chain of command goes up to Superman eventually. Everything does. It matters. Because I am trying to determine whether this was military reconnaissance or something else. Your mission: assess our capabilities, yes, plant surveillance equipment, possibly eliminate threats if opportunity arose. Marcus's eyes widened fractionally. Confirmation. Standard protocol for unknown assets, Rimuru continued, which tells me Superman is treating Sanctuary as a tactical problem to be solved rather than a political situation to be managed. That is useful information. What are you going to do with us? Sarah asked, fear breaking through training. Release you. 6 sets of eyes locked on the blue-haired figure with identical disbelief. You will return to your superiors, Rimuru explained, and report exactly what happened here. Your weapons failed. Your tactics failed. You were completely neutralized without a single injury. You will tell them that Sanctuary's defenses are absolute within our perimeter, but we have no interest in expansion or conflict. They'll never believe it, Marcus said. They will, Rimuru replied, because 5 of you will corroborate the same impossible story. And because I am sending you back with proof. Rimuru gestured. The paralysis lifted from all 6 operatives simultaneously. They scrambled to their feet, reaching for weapons that still would not function. Combat instincts overriding reason. Your equipment will resume normal operation once you cross back beyond our threshold, Rimuru informed them. Consider it a demonstration. Violence is contextual, not universal. Here it does not work. Elsewhere, your tools remain functional. The choice of where to stand is yours. This is a trick, James said. You're letting us go, so we'll lead you to our base. If I wanted to find your base, Diablo interjected pleasantly, I would simply follow the fear you carry like a beacon. Terror has a distinct signature, rather difficult to hide. But we will not follow, Rimuru assured them, because we are not interested in attacking the regime. We are interested in offering an alternative to it. You may leave now. The squad exchanged glances. Marcus made a decision. Fall back, he ordered. Controlled retreat. Watch our 6. They moved as a unit, professional discipline overriding confusion. Backed toward the perimeter. Crossed the invisible threshold. Marcus's rifle came alive in his hands. Safety indicators lit. The familiar weight of functional lethality returned. He looked back at Rimuru and Diablo, still standing in the center of Sanctuary, utterly unconcerned. Why? He called out. We came to kill you. Why let us walk away? Because killing you would prove Superman right, Rimuru answered. He believes power must dominate or be dominated. That every threat must be neutralized. That mercy is weakness. I prefer to demonstrate that power can simply decline to participate in that framework. The squad vanished into Metropolis's ruins. Diablo watched them disappear with the satisfaction of someone who had just delivered a particularly elegant lesson. They will report everything, he noted. Superman will know our capabilities, our restrictions, where we can and cannot reach. Yes, Rimuru agreed. And he will plan accordingly, which means his next move will be calculated, strategic, designed to exploit our limitations. That is preferable to blind escalation. You assume he fights intelligently. He built an empire, Rimuru responded. Stupid people do not accomplish that, no matter how strong. He is dangerous precisely because he thinks. Then why show our hand? Because, Rimuru said quietly, every operative we release is a seed of doubt. They expected torture, expected death, expected us to behave like every other power they have encountered. Instead, we gave them something more dangerous than fear. What? A question they cannot answer, Rimuru replied. Why would someone with absolute power choose not to use it? That question will eat at them, at their superiors, at Superman himself. Diablo considered this, smiled. Psychological warfare elevated to philosophy. How delightfully cruel. Not cruelty, Rimuru corrected. Necessity. Superman rules through certainty. The certainty that he is stronger, that resistance is futile, that his way is the only way. Introduce doubt into that equation, and the entire structure becomes unstable. They walked back toward the crater's center. Behind them, refugees began to stir, woken by the brief commotion. A few approached cautious, asking if everything was all right. All is well, Rimuru assured them. Some visitors came. They have left. You are safe. The woman with burn scars, who had started to think of herself as Elena again instead of Survivor 73, watched Rimuru with calculating eyes. The regime sent soldiers, she said. Not a question. They did, Rimuru confirmed. And you let them go. I did. Elena processed this. Years of regime conditioning said that was weakness. 4 years of survival said weakness got you killed. But something else, something older from before year 0 said maybe there were victories that did not require corpses. They will come back, she said. Yes, Rimuru agreed. With more soldiers, better equipment, different strategies. Each attempt will teach them more about what does not work here. Eventually, they will either accept our existence or exhaust their options. You sound awfully confident, Elena said, for someone who just showed the enemy exactly how to beat you. I showed them how our defenses operate, Rimuru replied. Not how to overcome them. There is a difference. Understanding a lock's mechanism does not grant you the key. Elena wanted to believe that. Wanted to trust that this blue-haired stranger who spoke in certainties and moved with inhuman calm actually knew what they were doing. But 4 years had taught her that hope was a luxury purchased with other people's lives. Just don't get us killed, she said finally, turned away. Rimuru watched her go, understood the weight behind those words. The compromise between wanting to believe and being too scarred to trust. They are fragile, CL observed. Extended trauma has eroded their capacity for optimism. They expect betrayal because betrayal has become the default. Then we prove them wrong, Rimuru thought back. Consistently, without exception, until the weight of evidence forces them to reconsider their assumptions. That will take time. We have time. What we cannot afford is to become what they fear we might be. Another absolute, another certainty, another power that demands submission disguised as protection. Dawn approached. The first light touched the crater's edge, illuminating refugees who were beginning to wake without immediate terror. Children who asked for breakfast instead of checking escape routes. People who were slowly, cautiously remembering how to live instead of survive. And in Central Command, 6 operatives delivered their report to officers who did not want to believe it. Marcus stood at attention, voice steady despite exhaustion. Sanctuary is impenetrable through conventional means, he reported. All weapon systems neutralized upon crossing the perimeter. Physical combat ineffective. The target's designation Rimuru and Diablo possess abilities that operate outside known physics. They demonstrated complete tactical superiority while choosing not to inflict casualties. The officer reviewing the report, a man who had served in 3 wars before the regime and understood the language of military assessments, looked up sharply. "Choosing not to, sir," Marcus said, "they had us completely neutralized. Could have executed us, interrogated us through force, extracted information through any number of methods. Instead, they talked to us, asked our names, then sent us back with a message." What message? That violence does not work in sanctuary. That they have no interest in attacking the regime. That they are offering an alternative, not a threat. The officer studied Marcus for a long moment. Saw a professional soldier delivering an honest assessment that contradicted everything the regime believed about power dynamics. "Dismissed," he said finally. "Get debriefed. Medical check. Then 48 hours downtime." The squad filed out. The officer turned to his terminal and began composing a classified report that would climb the chain of command until it reached Superman's desk. And in that report, a single line that would change the trajectory of the conflict: "Target demonstrates capability for extreme violence, but consciously refrains. Threat assessment uncertain. Recommend strategic reevaluation before further action." Somewhere in Sanctuary, Diablo smiled. Superman arrived at noon. Not with the sonic boom theatrics of his first visit. Not with the Justice League in formation. He descended through gray clouds with the controlled precision of someone who had already calculated every variable, measured every risk, prepared for every contingency. He landed 30 feet from Sanctuary's perimeter. Close enough to be heard. Far enough to demonstrate he understood the boundary existed. The refugees saw him, scattered like birds before a storm. Within seconds, Sanctuary's population had vanished into makeshift shelters behind debris, into shadows that offered the illusion of invisibility. 4 years of conditioning could not be erased by 2 days of safety. Only one figure remained visible in the open. Rimuru stood at the crater's center, blue hair, catching what little sunlight penetrated the cloud cover. The posture was relaxed, unhurried. Someone waiting for a scheduled appointment, rather than facing down the most powerful being on Earth. Superman's jaw tightened. That casual indifference to his presence, the absence of fear of preparation of any acknowledgement that standing before him required effort, graded against instincts honed through 1,000 confrontations. "I've read the reports," Superman said. His voice carried across the distance without effort, without amplification. 6 operatives neutralized, 0 casualties. They said you let them walk away. "I did," Rimuru confirmed. "Why?" "Because killing them would have accomplished nothing except proving that power solves problems through elimination." Superman's eyes narrowed. He had prepared for defiance, for ideology, for the righteous anger of someone building a resistance cell. This calm pragmatism was more difficult to categorize. "You're building a jurisdiction," Superman said. "Jurisdictions require accountability." "By you," Rimuru said. "Not a question. By someone who decides what threats look like." "And you've decided I'm one," Rimuru observed. "A zone outside your control. People choosing sanctuary over supervision. That threatens the system you've built." "It threatens stability," Superman corrected. "Your stability. Step inside. See what theirs looks like." Superman studied the invisible boundary. His enhanced vision could detect no barrier, no energy signature, no physical manifestation of the force that had neutralized his operatives. "What happens if I cross?" "The same thing that happens to everyone else. Violence ceases to function. You will be safe." Everyone will be safe. From you. Superman took a step forward. Stopped. Something in him, the part that had learned to trust his instincts, the part that had survived by calculating threats before they materialized, screamed warning. Entering that space meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant the world was unprotected. I can't, Superman said. Leaving myself vulnerable leaves everyone vulnerable. Everyone. Rimuru responded quietly. Or your authority. Someone has to make the hard choices, Superman said. I'm the only one strong enough. Strength is not qualification, Rimuru replied. It is circumstance. The strongest person in the room is not automatically the wisest or the most just. They are just the hardest to stop when they are wrong. The conversation was interrupted by movement behind Superman. A group of civilians approached from the ruins. 15, maybe 20 people. They moved with the jerky caution of prey navigating predator territory. At their center, a woman carrying a child. Superman turned, assessed the group with practiced efficiency. No weapons, no metahuman signatures, just survivors. High above, a regime surveillance drone tracked their approach. The tactical net crackled to life in Superman's earpiece. Wonder Woman's voice quiet, but clear. Intercept. No. Superman said. Stand down. The civilian saw him, froze. The woman with the child, her name was Mara. Though Superman did not know that, met his eyes for 3 seconds before looking away. Not defiance. Survival reflex. Do not challenge. Do not attract attention. Become invisible. Then she made a decision. She walked toward Sanctuary. Not around Superman, not seeking his permission, just choosing a destination and moving toward it with the deliberate steps of someone who had calculated that reaching safety was worth the risk of crossing a god's path. The others followed. One by one, eyes down, breathing shallow, walking the line between visible enough to not seem sneaky and invisible enough to not seem threatening. Superman stood in their path, not blocking them, just present. The physical manifestation of authority that did not need to threaten, because its existence was threat enough. Where are you going? He asked. The question was procedural. He already knew. Mara stopped, adjusted her grip on the child, a boy, maybe 3 years old, silent in the way children learn to be silent when noise attracted violence. Sanctuary, she said, voice steady despite the fears Superman could hear in her elevated heartbeat. The designated zones provide food, medical care, protection. Protection from what? Mara asked. Then, before courage could fail. From you. The words hung in the air like smoke. Behind Mara, the other civilians tensed. Someone who questioned Superman usually became an example. In Superman's earpiece, Wonder Woman's voice, Cal. He raised one hand, not threatening, just a gesture for the drone operator to hold position. I protect you from chaos, he said, from yourselves. And who protects us from our protector? Mara asked. The question had no good answer. Superman knew this, had known it since the moment he crossed the line from hero to administrator. The logic was circular by design. He protected them from threats, including himself, which required them to trust that his control was sufficient. It had worked for 4 years because no alternative existed. Until now. You can go, Superman said. The words tasted like defeat. I understand, Mara said. But I choose it anyway. She walked past him. The boy in her arms. Eli studied back at Superman with wide eyes that had already learned what power looked like, what it meant when gods walked among mortals and decided their fates with casual gestures. The child did not wave, did not smile, just watched until distance and debris blocked the line of sight. The other refugees followed. One became 5, became 10, became all 20 crossing into Sanctuary's perimeter. Superman watched them go, with the expression of someone witnessing a fundamental equation fail. When the last had crossed, Rimuru spoke. "That is what you cannot punch," the blue-haired figure said quietly. "Not me, not this boundary. The simple fact that people, when given a choice, might choose something other than your protection." "They'll regret it," Superman said. "When you can't maintain this. When reality reasserts itself." "Perhaps," Rimuru acknowledged. "I might be wrong about what this place can become. But your world can't survive certainty forever. Eventually someone will offer an alternative. Better it comes from intent than desperation." Superman's fists clenched, unclenched. The man of steel who had reduced cities to rubble with casual effort, who could hear a heartbeat from orbit, who had convinced himself that absolute power, wielded with absolute conviction, was the only path to peace. Standing outside a boundary that made all that power irrelevant. "This isn't over," he said. "No." Rimuru agreed. "But I would ask you one question before you decide your next action." "What?" "If people only obey because they fear consequences, are you governing or threatening?" Superman turned away, lifted off without another word. The displaced air from his departure scattered ash across the broken ground. Rimuru watched him become a speck against gray clouds. Understood what had just occurred. Not victory, not defeat. Just the introduction of uncertainty into a system that had operated on absolute conviction. "He will return," Ciel observed, "with strategies designed to exploit boundary limitations, siege tactics, resource denial, psychological pressure applied to refugees rather than direct confrontation. Analysis current resources." Rimuru thought back. Water purification sustainable through skill application. Food production requires external supply or agricultural development timeline 4 to 6 weeks. Medical supplies critically low. Social cohesion unstable. Recommendation Sanctuary can defend against violence, but remains vulnerable to isolation propaganda and internal fracture. "So we have a window," Rimuru concluded. "Before Superman realizes that starving us is more effective than fighting us." "Affirmative. Boundary integrity is absolute. Social integrity is not." Inside Sanctuary, Mara set Eli down. The boy looked up at her with questions he was too young to articulate, but old enough to feel. "Are we safe now?" he asked. Mara wanted to say yes. Wanted to promise him that crossing that invisible line meant the fear could finally end. But 4 years had taught her that promises were luxuries truth could not afford. "Safer," she said instead. "We are safer. That has to be enough." The woman with burn scars Elena approached. Studied at Mara with the assessment of someone who had survived by reading people quickly and accurately. "You challenged him," Elena said. "Directly. I've seen people vaporized for less." "I was tired," Mara replied only. "Tired of being afraid. Tired of teaching my son to be invisible. Tired of surviving when living used to mean something different. And if he comes back, if he decides we're a threat, then at least I made a choice," Mara said. instead of just accepting whatever he decided for me. Elena processed this, looked at Eli, who had already wandered off to join other children testing the boundaries, literal and metaphorical, of this new space. "Choice?" she said quietly. We forgot what that word meant. Across the city in the watchtower that served as the regime's nerve center, Superman stood before a tactical display and made his own choice. Wonder Woman stood beside him, silent, waiting. She had learned when to speak and when to simply be present. "They're leaving," Superman said finally. "Not in large numbers yet, but word is spreading." "Is that surprising?" Diana asked. "They're choosing the unknown over us." "That should tell us something." Superman looked at her sharply. Diana met his gaze without flinching. She had followed him this far, had supported the regime through choices that still woke her at night. But she had never stopped being a warrior, and warriors recognized when battles were being lost. "Their mistakes get people killed," Superman said. "So do ours," Diana replied. "Doubt is a luxury. But truth isn't. And the truth is, they're walking away from us." "Then we remind them what independence costs," Superman said. "Prepare siege protocols. I want supply line analysis, water sources, food distribution vectors, medical logistics. If they want autonomy, let them sustain it." "And if they can?" Diana asked. Superman said nothing, because that question led to implications he was not prepared to confront. If Sanctuary could survive without him, it proved that his protection was not necessary. If his protection was not necessary, then his authority was not justified. If his authority was not justified, then everything he had done, every choice, every compromise, every line crossed, had been optional. And optional meant he could have chosen differently. That was the thought he could not allow, the doubt that would unravel everything. So he chose action over introspection, strategy over philosophy, the familiar comfort of problems that could be solved through superior planning and application of overwhelming resources. "Implement the siege," he said. "Non-violent containment. Let logistics do what force cannot." Diana said nothing, but her hand rested on the lasso of truth at her hip, and she wondered, not for the first time, what answers Superman would give if she asked Rimuru's question. If people only obeyed because they feared consequences, was that governance or coercion? She suspected she knew the answer. She suspected Superman knew it too. And that was precisely why he would never allow himself to ask. The siege began quietly. No tanks rolled into position. No artillery batteries prepared bombardment patterns. Superman had learned subtlety from 4 years of governance. Force advertised was force wasted. Better to let scarcity do the work. Violence could not. By the third day, supply convoys stopped approaching Sanctuary's perimeter. Food shipments destined for the crater were rerouted to designated regime zones. Medical supplies vanished from black market channels. Water trucks that had serviced the area suddenly discovered urgent maintenance requirements. Nothing official, no proclamations, just the invisible hand of absolute authority closing around a problem it could not punch. Sanctuary's population had swelled to 1,200. Refugees arrived in clusters, families, work crews, entire neighborhoods that had whispered coordinates in the dark and moved as one. Each arrival strained resources that had never been designed for sustained independence. Rimuru stood at the crater's center and watched the arithmetic turn against them. Current projections, Rimuru thought to CL. Food reserves 11 days at current consumption. Medical supplies critically insufficient. Social stress indicators rising. 3 altercations prevented in last 24 hours. Boundary neutralized violence but cannot neutralize hunger, illness, or desperation. Recommendations: immediate establish rationing protocols. Medium-term develop agricultural capacity within boundary. Long-term negotiate external supply agreements or accept that sanctuary cannot sustain current population indefinitely. Rimuru said nothing. Watched a group of children play near the boundary's edge, their laughter carrying a fragility that came from not knowing how precarious safety had become. Elena approached, moving with the economical grace of someone conserving energy they might need later. "People are asking questions," she said without preamble, "about food, about medicine, about how long we can actually last here." "What are you telling them?" "The truth," Elena replied. "That we're safer from violence but not from starvation. That Superman doesn't need to break your boundary if he can wait for us to break ourselves." "And what do they say?" "Most say it's still better than the alternative. Some are starting to wonder if they made a mistake." She paused. "And a few are listening to someone who says there's a third option." Rimuru's attention sharpened. "Who calls himself a pilgrim. Showed up 2 days ago, speaks like a preacher. Says he's seen visions of how sanctuary can sustain itself, how we can have safety and abundance if we just commit to a different path." "Show me." They found him near the eastern edge, surrounded by 30 people, who listened with the intensity of the drowning offered driftwood. He was unremarkable, middle-aged, weathered face clothes that had seen better decades, but his voice carried weight that transcended appearance. "And I tell you, salvation does not come from avoiding conflict," he was saying. "It comes from embracing purpose. From recognizing that strength without conviction is merely existence." The old gods understood this. They knew that peace was not absence of war, but victory so complete that war became unnecessary. Several listeners nodded. A few made religious gestures, old habits from before the regime had crushed organized faith. "Who sent you?" Rimuru asked, voice cutting through the sermon like a blade through silk. The pilgrim turned. His smile was warm, paternal, utterly convincing. "No one sends me, friend. I go where need calls. And here I see people suffering for lack of direction. You offer them safety from violence. Admirable. But they are still prisoners of scarcity. What if there was a way to have both? Describe this way." "Commitment," the pilgrim replied. "Not to tyranny, but to purpose. There are forces older than Superman's regime. Powers that recognize strength when it is dedicated to worthy ends. They would support sanctuary. Provide what you cannot provide yourselves. All they ask is acknowledgement, tribute. A simple recognition that true power deserves respect." "Olympus," Rimuru responded. Statement, not question. The pilgrim's smile widened. The old gods remember what it means to protect their faithful, unlike certain modern pretenders to divinity. "Leave. Now, do not return." The pilgrim raised his hands in placating gesture. "I offer only choice. Isn't that what sanctuary represents? The freedom to choose one's own path?" "You offer servitude disguised as salvation," Rimuru replied. "Trading Superman's authority for divine obligation. The cage remains. Only the jailer changes." The pilgrim studied Rimuru for a long moment, then nodded, smile never faltering. "As you say. But when hunger sharpens its teeth, when children cry for food, you cannot provide when desperation makes ideology negotiable. The offer stands." He walked toward the boundary, paused at the threshold. "One more thing," he said, not turning around. "War recognizes war, even when it wears mercy's mask. You cannot build peace on a foundation that refuses all conflict. Eventually, conflict finds you anyway. Then he was gone, vanishing into the ruins with the ease of someone who knew exactly where shadows ran deepest. Elena looked at Rimuru. Ares. Yes, Rimuru confirmed. Using proxies to sow division, offering solutions that create dependencies. Classic strategy. Will it work? Depends on whether we can provide an alternative before desperation makes people forget why they chose freedom in the first place. That night, the real attack came. Not from Olympus, not from the regime. From the cracks in Sanctuary's foundation that Ares had been patiently widening since the moment it was built. It started with a scream. Mara's scream specifically. Raw, primal. The sound a mother makes when she sees her child in danger and knows she cannot reach him in time. Eli had been playing near the western edge with other children. A game involving scavenged toys and elaborate rules only they understood. Normal. Safe. The kind of scene that made adults remember what life had been like before the world broke. Then the infiltrator revealed himself. He had been among them for 2 days. Arrived with a family group, played the traumatized refugee with practiced skill, integrated seamlessly into Sanctuary's population. His real employers had trained him well, how to seem broken, how to avoid attention, how to wait for the perfect moment. The device he carried was apocalyptian. Not a weapon exactly. More of a resonance disruptor designed to identify and exploit weaknesses in dimensional barriers. Someone had studied the boundary, found the frequencies where Rimuru's law touched reality, calculated the exact harmonic interference that might create a microsecond gap. Might. The infiltrator activated it 3 feet from where the children played. The boundary flickered. Not failed, not shattered. Just hesitated for 0.3 of a second, while the conflicting rules fought for dominance. Rimuru's law against Mother Box technology channeled through war god manipulation. 0.3 of a second was enough. The fear tech assets Ares had seeded throughout the perimeter activated simultaneously. Not soldiers, not warriors. Just zealots who believed that the old gods deserved worship, that Sanctuary's secular independence was blasphemy, that Hera's vision of divine order was the only path to true peace. They had waited in the ruins, watched, learned the boundary's rhythm. And when the resonance disruptor created its microsecond window, they moved. 6 zealots. Armed with weapons that should not have functioned, blessed by Olympian ritual, consecrated through divine authority that operated on different axioms than Rimuru's law. They crossed the threshold in that tiny gap when physics couldn't decide which rules applied. Eli was closest. Mara saw the zealots materialize, saw their weapons, saw the trajectory that ended at her son. She ran. Not toward Eli, she knew she was too far, toward the zealot who had clear line of sight to the children, the woman who believed she was serving a righteous cause, who had been taught that spilling blood in divine service purified the world, who raised a blessed blade and aimed for the small target that represented everything Sanctuary had dared to promise. Mara threw herself between blade and child. The boundary reasserted itself. The gap closed. Rimuru's law snapped back into absolute authority, and the zealot's weapons died mid-swing. Mid-swing. Not before. The blade had already entered Mara's chest. The boundary could prevent new violence, but could not reverse kinetic energy already in motion. Could not undo momentum. Could not heal what had been cut when physics was momentarily negotiable. She fell. Eli screamed. Rimuru was there instantly. Spatial manipulation compressed the distance to nothing. knelt beside Mara as her blood spread across ground that had promised safety. "Medical assessment?" Rimuru demanded. "Catastrophic damage to cardiopulmonary system. Blood loss critical. Survival probability 0 without immediate divine tier intervention. Healing capabilities. Full regeneration possible but requires consent. Subject is human. Transformation to spiritual life form would grant survival, but fundamentally alter existence. Recommendation ask." Rimuru gazed at Mara. Her eyes were open aware. She had maybe 30 seconds before unconsciousness, maybe 2 minutes before death. "I can save you," Rimuru answered quietly. "But it requires changing what you are. Fundamentally, irreversibly. You would live, but not as you were." Mara's gaze drifted to Eli. The boy stood frozen, watching his mother die. "Will it hurt him?" she whispered. "Seeing me different?" "I don't know," Rimuru answered, honest. "But he is young. Children adapt to what love requires." Mara's hand found Rimuru's, gripped with fading strength. "No," she said. "Let me choose how I go." "Mara, I chose to come here, chose to stand between him and that blade. Let me choose this too, please." Rimuru understood, hated it, but understood. Consent was absolute, even when it meant death. "Eli will be cared for," Rimuru promised. "I swear it." "Thank you," Mara whispered. She observed at her son one last time, tried to smile, managed something close enough. Then she died, in a sanctuary built to prevent exactly this. Eli screamed again, kept screaming. Elena grabbed him, held him tight, tried to turn his face away from the sight. But he had already seen everything. The zealots stood paralyzed, weapons dead in their hands. The boundary held them like insects in amber. They could not flee, could not fight, could only watch as Rimuru stood turned to face them and underwent a transformation. Not physical. The blue-haired figure remained unchanged. But something in the air shifted. Temperature dropped. Light bent strangely. The analytical calm that had characterized every interaction hardened into something colder, ruthless mode. Not rage, not grief. Just the absolute clarity that came when sentiment was locked away and only logic remained. Efficient, merciless. The version of Rimuru that understood that some problems required solutions untempered by compassion. "Diablo," Rimuru said. Voice flat, empty. "Find the architects of this. Trace the supply chain. Technology, funding, organization, cut it at every level." The dark-suited figure materialized from shadow, gazed at Mara's body, at the zealots, at Rimuru's expression, understood immediately what mode his master had entered. "Understood," Diablo said. "Parameters, no killing," Rimuru replied. "But make them understand that war has supply lines. Destroy the infrastructure. Make continuing this effort more costly than abandoning it." "And these," Diablo gestured to the paralyzed zealots. Rimuru looked at them. 6 people who believed they served a righteous cause, who had been weaponized by gods who moved pieces on boards mortals could not see, who had killed someone whose only crime was choosing freedom. Memory extraction. Learn everything they know about who recruited them, how they were equipped, what they were promised. Then release them. Release. Diablo's tone held faint surprise. "With modifications," Rimuru clarified. "They will remember what they did. Will be unable to forget. will carry that weight for whatever remains of their lives. Sometimes living with consequences is a harsher sentence than dying without them. Diablo bowed. As you command, Rimuru-sama. He approached the first zealot, placed one gloved hand against her temple. Her eyes went wide as Diablo's consciousness invaded the architecture of her mind with surgical precision. Rimuru turned away, walked to where Elena held Eli. The boy had stopped screaming, just stared at his mother's body with the blank expression of someone whose reality had shattered beyond repair. I promised her, Rimuru said to Elena. He will be cared for, protected, given every resource Sanctuary can provide. And when Sanctuary falls? Elena asked, blunt, angry. When the next breach comes and more people die in your perfect safe zone. Then I adapt, Rimuru replied. Find the weakness, repair it, ensure this specific failure cannot repeat. That's not good enough, Elena said. She's dead. One woman dead is still one too many. I know, Rimuru said quietly. The ruthless mode cracked slightly, enough for grief to bleed through. I know. Across the city, Diablo worked with methodical efficiency. The zealots' memories revealed a network, safe houses, supply caches, recruitment centers disguised as aid stations, all funded through channels that traced back to Olympian proxies operating in the shadows of Superman's regime. Diablo visited each location, did not destroy them. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he contaminated supply lines with fear, left psychological markers that made everyone involved paranoid, turned allies against each other through carefully planted suspicions, made continuing the operation psychologically unbearable. By dawn, the infrastructure Ares had built over months had collapsed into infighting and terror. In Olympus, Ares watched through divine perception and smiled. Not because his proxies had succeeded, they had failed perfectly. Not because Sanctuary had been breached, it had held. But because Rimuru had responded exactly as calculated. With ruthless efficiency, with cold precision, with a transformation from peaceful alternative to active threat. One death, one breach, one demonstration that Sanctuary's promise of absolute safety was negotiable under the right circumstances. That was all it took. Now Superman would see Sanctuary not as a philosophical challenge, but as an active threat that had shown willingness to strike back. Now Olympus could position itself as mediator rather than instigator. Now the pieces were moving toward the configuration Ares required. War fed on escalation, and escalation had just been served. In Sanctuary, Eli sat beside his mother's covered body and did not cry. Elena stayed with him, offered no comfort because what comfort could there be? Just presence. Just the human acknowledgement that some grief was too large for words. Rimuru stood at the boundary's edge and recalculated. Boundary modification required, CL reported. The resonance disruptor exploited harmonic interference between your law and Mother Box technology. Recommend expand axiom coverage to include all divine and technological manipulation attempts. Cost increased mental resource allocation. Implement it, Rimuru answered. Warning this will make you a more active participant in conflict. Expanding the law means imposing your will more broadly. Superman will interpret this as aggression. He already does, Rimuru replied. The moment we refused to accept his authority, we became a threat. Might as well be a functional one. The boundaries shimmered, expanded, grew more complex as it learned to recognize and neutralize not just violence, but the frameworks that enabled violence. Divine blessing, technological exploitation, psychological manipulation. Sanctuary became harder to breach. It also became exactly what Ares had predicted: it would a fortress. And fortresses, by their nature, prepared for war. The sky broke open at dawn. Not with clouds or rain or any natural phenomenon. The air above Metropolis directly tore like fabric, revealing light that had never touched Earth's atmosphere. Divine light. The kind that didn't illuminate so much as announce presence. Through the tear descended figures that made Superman look mortal by comparison. Zeus led them, king of Olympus, god of thunder and sky and authority that predated human civilization by millennia. He wore the bearing of someone who had never been told no and expected the pattern to continue indefinitely. Beside him, Hera, queen of gods. Her presence carried the weight of divine matrimony twisted into weapon. Every movement calculated, every glance a judgment. Behind them, a dozen Olympians in war aspect. Not the benevolent deities of myth, but the versions that had demanded blood sacrifice and burned cities that forgot to bow. They landed 3 blocks from Sanctuary. The impact cracked pavement, shattered windows that had somehow survived 4 years of regime control. Made it very clear that this was not a negotiation. Rimuru felt their arrival before seeing it. Divine presence registered as pressure against the boundary, not attacking, just existing, with enough force that reality had to accommodate their weight. Olympus seeth mamisagi da CL identified. Full Pantheon mobilization. Power levels mid to high divine tier. Threat assessment significant. They are not here to observe. Inside Sanctuary, refugees who had just begun processing Mara's death now faced a new horror. Gods. Actual gods. The beings Superman had pushed to the margins, whose temples had been declared illegal, whose worship was considered sedition. And they looked angry. Rimuru walked to the boundary's edge, stopped 30 feet from where Zeus stood, radiating displeasure. "You stand on sovereign ground," Zeus declared. His voice carried the resonance of thunder held barely in check. "Metropolis falls under divine jurisdiction, has for millennia. Superman's usurpation was temporary annoyance. Yours will not be tolerated." "I claim no jurisdiction," Rimuru replied. "Only the right of those within Sanctuary to exist without bowing to external authority, divine or otherwise." Hera stepped forward. Her presence carried calculated fury. "You shelter our faithful," she said. "Prevent them from receiving proper guidance. Lead them to believe they can exist without divine protection. This is not neutrality. This is apostasy." "Your faithful chose to leave," Rimuru observed. "I extended no invitation, made no promises of superiority to divine law. They came because they preferred uncertainty to submission." "Submission," Zeus repeated. The word tasted wrong in his mouth. "Mortals do not submit to gods. They receive blessings in exchange for proper reverence. This is the natural order. And if they choose not to revere, then they learn what divine displeasure means," Zeus said simply. "As you are about to." Lightning gathered in his hand. Not metaphorical. Actual lightning physics bent into weapon electricity that operated on principles that predated scientific understanding. He hurled it at Sanctuary. The bolt struck the boundary and dispersed. Energy that could have obliterated a city block just ceased to exist, translated into heat that dissipated harmlessly into the atmosphere. Zeus stared, tried again. More power this time, enough to make the air scream, same result. Your divine authority operates on the principle that gods are fundamentally superior to mortals, that your will supersedes theirs. Inside Sanctuary, that principle is not recognized. Divine or mortal, all are subject to the same law. Violence does not function. Hera's expression shifted, calculation replacing fury. You are no mortal, she observed. What manner of being creates law that supersedes divine mandate? One from elsewhere, Rimuru answered, where divinity is not automatic authority, but merely another form of power, respected when earned, rejected when abused. The confrontation was interrupted by new arrivals. Superman descended from the sky with Wonder Woman and Cyborg flanking. The regime had been monitoring Olympus's movements, had known this confrontation was inevitable. He landed between the gods and Sanctuary, positioned himself as mediator, though everyone present understood he was choosing sides through positioning alone. Zeus, Superman said. His voice carried the carefully neutral tone of someone managing unstable explosives. Olympus has no authority here. We've had this conversation. And I told you then, Zeus replied, that your regime exists by our tolerance. Do not mistake patience for weakness, Kal-El. Tolerance cuts both ways, Superman said. You operate within parameters I've established. Step outside them, and we have a problem. Hera laughed. The sound carried genuine amusement. Listen to him, she said to Zeus. The flying mortal believes he can dictate terms to Olympus. How precious. Mortal with the power to end this conversation, Superman replied. His eyes began to glow. Heat vision building. Zeus matched him. Lightning crackling around his form, two absolute authorities facing each other over a city neither truly controlled, both willing to destroy what they claim to protect rather than acknowledge limitation. Stop, Rimuru said. The single word carried enough weight that both gods Olympian and Kryptonian paused. You stand here arguing jurisdiction, Rimuru continued, over people who did not request your governance. Superman claims regime authority. Zeus claims divine mandate. Neither of you seem to notice that the people you're fighting over chose neither option. They are mortals, Zeus said. They require guidance. They require protection, Superman corrected. They require agency, Rimuru countered. The right to make decisions for themselves, including bad ones. You both offer the same thing, submission dressed as security. I offer nothing except space where their choices belong to them. And when their choices lead to chaos, Superman demanded. When they hurt themselves, hurt each other, what then? Then they learn, Rimuru answered. Or they don't. But the lesson is theirs to experience, not yours to prevent. That is madness, Hera said. That is freedom, Rimuru replied. The version you both claim to champion while denying at every opportunity. Wonder Woman, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. And what of yesterday's attack? She asked. Your boundary was breached. A woman died. You responded by unleashing your servant to dismantle Olympian infrastructure across the city. That doesn't sound like neutrality. Rimuru turned to her. Diana met the gaze without flinching. The attack was orchestrated using apocalyptian technology, Olympian-blessed weapons and zealots recruited through divine proxies. Someone went to considerable effort to breach Sanctuary, to prove it was vulnerable, to kill someone whose only crime was choosing shelter over servitude. Rimuru glanced at Zeus and Hera. Your zealots killed her. Your weapons, your agenda. So yes, I responded by cutting your supply lines, making continuing that agenda more expensive than abandoning it. Would you prefer I had done nothing? Let you continue infiltrating recruiting, preparing the next breach? We authorized no such action, Hera said. Too quickly. No, Rimuru agreed. You merely created the conditions, supplied the weapons, blessed the zealots, provided divine justification. But you never gave a direct order. Plausible deniability. The strategy of cowards who want war's benefits without war's responsibility. Zeus's expression darkened. Lightning intensified. You dare, I dare, Rimuru interrupted, because unlike everyone else in this city, I am not afraid of gods or superpowered dictators. You want sanctuary gone, dismantle it yourselves. But know that the moment you try, I will respond. Not with negotiation, not with diplomacy, with absolute neutralization of whatever force you bring. You threaten us. Hera's voice held disbelief. I inform you, Rimuru corrected. Threats imply uncertainty. There is none. Attack Sanctuary directly and you will fail. The only question is how much you're willing to lose, proving it. Superman watched this exchange with growing unease. Rimuru had just declared open defiance of both regime and Olympus. Had positioned Sanctuary not as neutral ground, but as a third power that would fight both if necessary. This was exactly what he had feared. What he had tried to prevent through siege. A rival authority that could not be intimidated, could not be reasoned with, could only be destroyed or tolerated. And destroying it would prove Rimuru's point that neither he nor Zeus offered anything except violence when challenged. This is not sustainable, Superman said quietly. 3 powers in one city. Eventually we collide. Then leave, Rimuru suggested. Both of you. Withdraw your claims. Let Sanctuary exist as neutral ground. Let people choose whether to live under your authority or outside it. Impossible, Zeus said. Unacceptable. Superman agreed. Rimuru nodded, unsurprised. Then we have identified the real problem. Neither of you can tolerate the existence of space outside your control, not because it threatens you tactically, but because it threatens you philosophically. It demonstrates that people can survive without your governance. And if they can survive without you, then your authority is optional. And optional means you were never necessary, just convenient for you. The words landed like grenades. Superman's jaw tightened. Zeus's lightning flared. Both recognized the accusation for what it was. Truth wrapped in challenge. Before either could respond, the air twisted. Not like Olympus's divine light or Superman's sonic boom. This was mechanical, technological. The specific wrongness of a boom tube opening. Through it poured parademons, hundreds of them. Apocalypse's shock troops. Insectoid nightmares designed for one purpose, overwhelming force applied without discrimination. They descended on Metropolis like locusts, attacking everything indiscriminately. Regime forces, Olympian positions, the ruins between. They made no distinction between targets. Just spread destruction with mechanical efficiency. Superman shot skyward immediately. Wonder Woman and Cyborg followed. The regime's priority was clear: protect what remained of the city. Zeus snarled, gestured to his pantheon. The Olympians launched themselves at the parademon swarms, with divine fury unleashed. Within seconds, Metropolis became a 3-way battlefield. Regime fighting parademons, Olympus fighting parademons, and everyone ignoring Sanctuary entirely in the chaos. Rimuru watched the sky burn and understood immediately. Dark side of Sa, CL confirmed. Apocalypse deployment pattern. Strategy force ceasefire through mutual threat. Make all parties reassess priorities when faced with common enemy. He's not trying to conquer, Rimuru thought back. He's reminding everyone what actual cosmic threat looks like. Making Superman and Zeus's conflict seem trivial by comparison. Effective strategy. Probability of immediate attack on Sanctuary reduced to near zero. All factions now focused on parademon threat. Diablo materialized at Rimuru's side. Watched the aerial combat with professional interest. "Shall we assist?" he asked. "No Sanctuary remains neutral. Let them fight their war. We protect those inside our boundary." "Even if the city burns?" "Especially then," Rimuru replied. "The moment we join their fight, we become another faction. Another power claiming to protect people through superior force. We stay here. We keep Sanctuary safe. And we prove that there is a space where their wars do not reach." A parademon wing broke from the main swarm. Dove toward Sanctuary, 50 strong, claws extended. They hit the boundary and plainly stopped. Momentum ceased. Weapons failed. They hung in the air like flies in amber, unable to advance, unable to retreat. Rimuru gestured. The boundary expanded briefly, absorbed the paralyzed parademons into imaginary space. When it contracted, they were gone. Non-lethal containment, Rimuru explained to Diablo. They exist in stasis, not dead, not suffering, just removed from the equation until someone wants to negotiate their release. More parademons tested the boundary. All met the same fate. Within minutes, Sanctuary had absorbed nearly 200 of Apocalypse shock troops. The boom tube closed. The parademon swarms withdrew as quickly as they had arrived. The entire assault had lasted 12 minutes, long enough to kill 30 people, destroy 6 city blocks, and force everyone involved to remember that there were threats larger than ideological disputes. Superman descended slowly. His costume was torn. His blood stained the cape. He gazed exhausted in a way super speed healing could not address. Zeus landed nearby. The god's divine aspect had dimmed. Whatever energy he had expended fighting parademons had cost him. Both observed at Sanctuary, at the zone that had weathered the assault without casualty, that had absorbed 200 parademons while they had struggled against hundreds more. "You could have helped," Superman said. Accusation clear. "I could have," Rimuru agreed. "And then you would have expected me to help next time. And the time after that. Until Sanctuary became just another weapon in your arsenal. Another tool you wielded when convenient and resented when it refused orders." "People died," Wonder Woman said. She had landed beside Superman. Her armor bore scorch marks. "Yes," Rimuru acknowledged. "And I grieve them. But their deaths are not my responsibility. Darkseid attacked. You fought. Those are the relevant causalities. I am not obligated to fight your wars simply because I have the power to." "You have the power to save lives," Superman insisted. "That creates responsibility." "No," Rimuru replied. "It creates choice. You chose to make your power everyone's business, to impose your protection whether wanted or not. I choose differently. And you hate that, not because it's wrong, but because it demonstrates an alternative you never considered, that power can only decline to participate." Zeus had remained silent, studying Rimuru with calculating eyes. Now he spoke. "The Kryptonian is correct about one thing," Zeus said. "This city cannot sustain 3 powers. Eventually, conflict is inevitable, Darkseid has merely delayed it. Then I offer you a choice, Rimuru answered. Recognize Sanctuary as sovereign neutral ground. Neither regime nor Olympus interferes. People choose freely whether to live under your authority or mine. We coexist. And if we refuse, Superman asked. Then we fight, Rimuru said directly. And you discover whether your combined might is sufficient to break a boundary designed to withstand gods and cosmic entities. I would not recommend the attempt, but the choice is yours. Silence stretched. Superman and Zeus exchanged glances. Two absolute rulers finding themselves in agreement for the first time. They could not tolerate Sanctuary's existence, could not accept its challenge to their authority. But they also could not afford a fight that might prove Rimuru correct, that their power was not absolute, not necessary, not even particularly special. We require time, Zeus said finally, to consider your proposal. You have until the siege breaks Sanctuary or Sanctuary breaks the siege, Rimuru replied. Whichever comes first. Zeus departed. Olympus followed. The divine presence withdrew, leaving only scorched pavement and the lingering smell of ozone. Superman remained. Looked at Sanctuary, at the refugees who had emerged to witness gods and super beings clash without touching them. You can't win, he said quietly. Not long-term. Darkseid proved that. There are always larger threats, always someone who will test your boundary until it breaks. Perhaps, Rimuru agreed. But until then, these people have a choice. And choice, I am learning, is worth defending, even when victory is uncertain. Superman lifted off, disappeared into the gray sky. Inside Sanctuary, Elena found Rimuru at the boundary's edge. You just declared war on everyone, she observed. I declared independence, Rimuru corrected. They interpreted it as war because they cannot imagine power that does not seek dominion. Can we survive this? I don't know, Rimuru admitted, but we are going to try. And if we fail having chosen our path, not having it chosen for us. Elena nodded, turned to leave, stopped. For what it's worth, she said, I think Mara would approve. She chose how she went. Maybe we get to choose how we stand. She walked away, leaving Rimuru alone with Diablo. This will escalate, Diablo observed. Superman cannot tolerate our existence. Zeus cannot accept our defiance. Darkseid has shown interest, and Ares is watching, Rimuru finished. Pleased that all the pieces are finally moving toward collision. War feeds on escalation, and we have just given him exactly what he wanted. What do? We prepare for the moment when all three powers converge. When Sanctuary must prove it can stand against God's super beings and cosmic tyrants simultaneously. And we do not compromise who we are in the process. That may be impossible, Diablo noted. Yes, Rimuru agreed. It may be. The boom tubes opened at midnight. Not one, not a dozen. 300 simultaneous ruptures in space-time across Metropolis, each disgorging parademons in formations that spoke of tactical planning rather than blind aggression. This was not a raid. This was invasion. The regime's early warning systems screamed alerts 3 seconds before the first portal stabilized. Superman was airborne within 5. Wonder Woman and the Flash mobilized strike teams within 10. By 15 seconds, the Justice League was engaging on 12 fronts simultaneously. It was not enough. Apocalypse had committed forces that dwarfed the first incursion. thousands of parademons, dozens of apocalyptic war machines, and leading them something that made every previous threat recalibrate. Not Darkseid himself. The Lord of Apocalypse did not soil his hands with preliminary conquest, but his general had come, Steppenwolf, ancient, brutal, a warrior who had conquered 10,000 worlds and remembered every battle with professional satisfaction. He materialized through the largest boom tube, carrying his electro-axe like an extension of his arm. Behind him, 3 mother boxes pulsed with synchronized harmony. The technological artifacts that gave Apocalypse its edge over mere divine or superhuman opposition. Steppenwolf surveyed Metropolis with the dispassion of someone evaluating real estate. "This world resists," he said to no one in particular. His voice carried the gravel of eons. "Good. Darkseid prefers worlds that remember what defiance costs." Superman hit him at supersonic speed. The impact leveled a city block. Steppenwolf slid backward 300 feet, stopped, smiled. "The Kryptonian," he said with genuine pleasure. "I have conquered 17 worlds, protected by your species' remnants. None survived. You will be the 18th. They clashed. 2 beings operating at power levels that made conventional physics negotiable. Heat vision met electro-axe. Super strength against ancient warrior technique. The fight carved a scar across Metropolis, measured in demolished buildings and cratered streets. Elsewhere, Wonder Woman led Cyborg and a dozen regime elites against parademon swarms that fought with disturbing coordination. These were not the mindless drones from before. These had tactical awareness, flanking maneuvers, coordinated strikes. The Flash evacuated civilians at speeds that blurred reality. But for every 100 he saved, 200 more found themselves in parademon path. The mathematics were brutal. Within Sanctuary, alarms that Rimuru had installed screamed warnings. The boundary held against stray energy blasts and redirected parademons, but the sheer scale of destruction outside created its own pressure. Refugees pressed against the invisible line, watching Metropolis burn. Some wanted to flee deeper into the crater. Others suggested fighting. Most just stood paralyzed by the recognition that safety was relative when gods warred. Elena found Rimuru at the eastern edge, observing the battle with analytical detachment. "You're really not going to help," she said. "Not accusation. Confirmation." "No," Rimuru replied. "People are dying out there." "Yes, and you can stop it." "Probably," Rimuru acknowledged. "But the moment I intervene, I become what Superman is, what Zeus claims to be. Another power deciding when violence is justified, when intervention is necessary, who deserves saving and who does not." "That's not the same," Elena protested. "Superman imposes his will. You'd be helping." "The difference is smaller than you think. Both involve me deciding that my judgment of when to act supersedes others' agency. Superman believes his power obligates intervention. I believe it obligates restraint. Both positions are absolutes. Both claim moral high ground. Neither can prove correctness except through outcomes we cannot predict." An explosion rocked the eastern district. Fire bloomed orange against black sky. "Then what's the point?" Elena demanded. "If you won't fight, Apocalypse won't help. The regime won't do anything except stand here and philosophize while people burn. What are you even for?" Rimuru turned to face her fully. The blue-haired figure's expression held something unexpected grief. "I am for them," Rimuru said quietly, gesturing to the refugees. The people who chose to be here, knowing exactly what that meant. They traded Superman's protection for autonomy, traded certainty for choice. That choice has costs. Sometimes those costs are watching others suffer while we maintain our position. It is not clean. It is not heroic. But it is consistent. Consistency isn't worth innocent lives, Elena said. Perhaps not, Rimuru agreed. But inconsistency destroys what makes Sanctuary different. The moment I decide that my power justifies overriding the principle I established, that violence and intervention are contextual, not universal, I become another authority figure who breaks rules when convenient. And if I can break them, why should anyone else follow them? Elena stared at Rimuru, understanding crystallizing into something colder. You're afraid, she said. Not of apocalypse, of becoming Superman, of that first compromise leading to the second, third, 100th. You're so scared of turning into a tyrant that you'll let people die to avoid the risk. Yes, Rimuru admitted. Because I have seen what I become when I stop questioning my choices, when I decide that outcomes justify methods, when I convince myself that my superior power means superior wisdom. I have been that version of myself, and it required centuries to climb back from that abyss. The admission hung between them, raw, honest. The kind of vulnerability that made Elena reconsider her anger. So what do we do? She asked finally. We hold Man, Rimuru answered. We protect Sanctuary. We demonstrate that there is a space where apocalypse cannot reach. And if Superman or Zeus cannot defeat Steppenwolf, then I will reconsider. But only then. Only when the alternative is complete collapse. Across the burning city, Superman and Steppenwolf's battle had reached a stalemate. Neither could gain decisive advantage. Superman's strength matched Steppenwolf's millennia of combat experience. Every strike Superman landed, the ancient warrior absorbed and countered. Every heat vision blast, Steppenwolf deflected with electro-axe precision. But Superman was tiring. Kryptonian physiology had limits. Solar energy depleted under sustained combat. He could feel his reactions slowing by microseconds that Steppenwolf exploited ruthlessly. You fight well, Steppenwolf acknowledged mid-exchange. His axe carved air where Superman's head had been milliseconds before. But you fight alone. Where are your gods, your allies, the boundary maker who claims neutrality? This is my city, Superman growled. My responsibility. And that pride, Steppenwolf noted, is why you will lose. Darkseid has seen this pattern on every world you Kryptonians infest. Always alone, always certain of superiority, always shocked when superiority proves insufficient. The sky split. Not with boom tubes this time. With divine light that made Apocalypse's technology look primitive by comparison. Zeus descended through clouds that parted like subjects before a king, Hera beside him. The Olympian pantheon arrayed in full war configuration. They landed between Superman and Steppenwolf with enough force to crater pavement. Apocalypse, Zeus' declared voice carrying across the battlefield. You invade divine jurisdiction. This world belongs to Olympus by ancient right. Withdraw or face consequences your master will not appreciate. Steppenwolf studied the gods with professional interest. Divine jurisdiction, he repeated. Darkseid has conquered 27 pantheons. Olympus will be 28. But if you wish to expedite the process, he gestured. Mother boxes pulsed. 300 parademons redirected from scattered battles to converge on the god's position. Simultaneously, boom tubes opened behind Olympus, disgorging heavy apocalyptic war machines that made previous threats look restrained. Zeus snarled. Lightning gathered with enough intensity to turn night into noon. Hera's presence solidified into weapon. The other gods assumed combat aspects that mortal worship had forgotten. Superman watched the two factions prepare to clash and made a calculation. Alone, he could not defeat Steppenwolf. With Olympus, perhaps they could drive Apocalypse back. But that required cooperation, alliance, acknowledgement that his regime needed external support. It tasted like defeat. He did it anyway. Zeus, Superman said. The word cost him something fundamental. Temporary alliance. Drive them back. Then we return to our dispute. Zeus glanced at him. The god's expression held vindication. Agreed, Zeus said. Olympus and regime united against external threat, as it should be. They turned as one to face Steppenwolf. The ancient warrior smiled. Finally, he said. Proper opposition. The battle that followed made previous clashes look restrained. Lightning met plasma fire. Divine strength against apocalyptic engineering. Superman's heat vision carved through war machines, while Zeus's thunderbolts scattered parademon formations. Wonder Woman and Hera fought side by side, warrior princess and divine queen finding unexpected synchronization. For the first time since the invasion began, Apocalypse's forces were driven back. Steppenwolf observed this with calculation rather than concern. The mother boxes at his command pulsed new patterns. Analysis, adjustment. The ancient warrior who had conquered 10,000 worlds did not panic when strategies required modification. He raised his electro-axe, made a gesture that carried command weight. Every parademon, every war machine, every apocalyptic asset simultaneously pivoted and charged towards sanctuary, not to breach it, to test it, to force the boundary maker to choose between maintaining neutrality and protecting 1,200 refugees from overwhelming force. Superman saw the tactical shift, understood immediately. No, he shouted, shot towards sanctuary at maximum speed, too late. The first wave of parademons hit sanctuary's boundary like a tsunami against rock. They did not penetrate. The law held. Violence ceased. Weapons failed. Every attack dissipated into harmless energy redistribution. But there were thousands. They piled against the invisible line, weight mounting, pressure building, not trying to break through with force, but with sheer mass. Thousands of bodies creating physical barrier that trapped refugees inside what had been sanctuary and was becoming cage. Inside, panic spread. People screamed, pressed toward the crater's center, away from the writhing mass of parademons that covered every visible edge like insects drowning a light. Rimuru stood motionless, watched the tactical evolution with clinical detachment. Assessment. Rimuru thought to CL. Steppenwolf is not attempting breach. He is creating siege within siege. Refugees cannot leave without facing parademons, cannot remain indefinitely without resources. He forces choice abandon neutrality or watch sanctuary become tomb. Psychological warfare elevated to strategic art. Recommendations. Option 1. Eliminate parademon barrier through mass absorption. Cost demonstrates offensive capability validates. Superman's fear that sanctuary is weapon. Option 2. Maintain position. Cost refugees experience trauma of containment, possible defection. Option 3. Negotiate with Steppenwolf. Cost acknowledges him as legitimate authority, compromises neutrality. Rimuru considered these options with the cold logic of someone who had made similar calculations across lifetimes. Then made a fourth choice. The boundary expanded. Not outward that would have pushed against the parademons' created conflict. Instead, it grew upward and inward simultaneously, creating a dome, a complete sphere of law that enclosed sanctuary in three-dimensional protection. The parademons that had been piling against the perimeter found themselves suddenly outside a construct that had no edges they could pressure, no walls they could climb, no weakness they could exploit through mass. Inside, refugees glanced up, saw the dome overhead, realized they were now completely sealed, protected but isolated, safe but trapped. Steppenwolf observed this adaptation with professional appreciation. Clever, he acknowledged. The boundary maker understands that defense and offense are different languages, refuses to speak mine. But isolation is also victory. A power that cannot project force is merely a curiosity. He turned back to Superman and Zeus. Your neutral zone is neutralized, he informed them. Now, where were we? The battle resumed. But something had shifted. Superman and Zeus fought with less coordination. Both kept glancing toward Sanctuary, toward the dome that represented everything their alliance was supposedly protecting, but could not reach. Inside the dome, Elena found Rimuru at the geometric center. We're sealed in, she said. Yes, Rimuru confirmed. For how long? Until the battle concludes, Rimuru replied. One way or another. If Superman and Zeus defeat Steppenwolf, the parademons withdraw. If Steppenwolf wins, he either destroys the dome or loses interest. Either outcome resolves the siege. And if he destroys the dome... Rimuru said nothing. The answer was obvious. Then we die having chosen neutrality, Elena said. Is that principle worth 1,200 lives? Ask them, Rimuru suggested. Elena turned, observed at the refugees who had gathered in clusters, families holding each other, individuals staring at the dome overhead, Eli sitting beside where his mother had died silent. She walked among them, asked the question Rimuru had posed. Is staying neutral worth dying for? The answers varied. Some said yes immediately. Others hesitated. A few demanded they fight. Most just gazed tired. But when Elena called for a show of hands, stay neutral or ask Rimuru to fight, the vote was decisive. 1,100 chose neutrality. 100 asked to fight. Elena returned to Rimuru with the count. They chose, she said simply. Rimuru nodded, unsurprised. Then we hold and we trust that people who built Superman's regime and Zeus's pantheon and Darkseid's empire are smart enough to recognize mutual threat when it materializes. Outside the dome, the battle raged. Inside, 1,200 people waited, and in the spaces between Ares, watched with satisfaction. War had come to Metropolis in its purest form. 3 factions fighting for dominance. One faction sealed in perfect neutrality, all trajectories converging toward the moment when choice would become impossible. When Sanctuary would have to break its principles or watch everything burn. And either outcome fed the fire he had spent months carefully stoking. The battle had lasted 16 hours. Superman's solar reserves were depleted to critical levels. His movements had slowed from faster than light to merely supersonic. Blood, Kryptonian blood that should not exist outside theoretical scenarios, stained his torn costume. Zeus's divine aspect had dimmed. The god who had descended like dawn now moved with the heavy deliberation of someone rationing power they could not replenish mid-battle. Lightning still answered his call, but with noticeable delay. Wonder Woman fought with mechanical precision, past the point where technique could compensate for exhaustion. Cyborg systems ran on emergency protocols. The Flash had stopped evacuating civilians an hour ago. There were no more civilians left alive in the combat zone to evacuate. The Olympian pantheon showed similar degradation. Gods bled. Warriors stumbled. Immortality did not mean invincibility, and Apocalypse had calculated exactly how much punishment divine flesh could absorb before failure. Steppenwolf, by contrast, fought with the same controlled efficiency he had demonstrated 16 hours prior. The ancient warrior who had conquered 10,000 worlds knew how to pace himself. Knew that battles were won not through superior strength, but through superior endurance. He had time, they did not. The mathematics were brutal. At current attrition rates, the combined regime Olympus alliance would collapse within 3 hours. Steppenwolf would claim Metropolis. Apocalypse would establish a beachhead. And from that position, Earth's conquest would become inevitable. Superman knew this. Had known it for the last 6 hours. Had been calculating alternatives with the desperate focus of someone watching all options narrow toward unacceptable. He gazed toward Sanctuary, toward the dome that had remained perfectly intact while everything outside burned, toward the power that could end this battle with a gesture, but refused to lift a finger. The calculation completed. He broke from combat, shot toward the dome at whatever speed exhausted Kryptonian physiology could manage, landed hard enough to crack pavement, stood before the invisible sphere that separated neutrality from engagement. "Rimuru," he shouted, voice carrying the rasp of someone who had screamed orders for 16 hours. "We're losing. Steppenwolf will take the city. You have the power to stop this." Inside the dome, Rimuru stood, walked to where Superman's voice reached clearest. The blue-haired figure glanced different. Something in the posture suggested decisions made and accepted. "Yes," Rimuru said just. "Then help us," Superman demanded. "End your neutrality's fight." "No," Rimuru replied. Superman's fists clenched. Heat vision threatened to ignite despite solar depletion. "People are dying. I know, and I grieve them. But their deaths are consequences of choices made by you, Zeus and Steppenwolf. Not by me. You started a war you cannot finish. That is not my responsibility to resolve. You have the power. I have choice," Rimuru interrupted. "The choice to use power or refrain from using it. You keep conflating those. Power does not obligate action. It enables it. I choose not to enable your war." Zeus had followed Superman, landed beside the Man of Steel with less grace than usual. The god studied Rimuru through the dome with calculating eyes. "You would let Apocalypse conquer Earth," Zeus said. "Let Darkseid claim this world, all because of pride." "Not pride," Rimuru corrected. "Consistency. I said Sanctuary would remain neutral. That principle does not bend because outcomes become uncomfortable. If I break it now, what prevents me from breaking it again and again until neutrality becomes just another word for helps whoever asks loudest?" "Then Earth falls," Superman said. "Everyone not in your dome dies or becomes Apocalypse slaves. And you call that consistency. I call it acknowledging limits," Rimuru replied. "I cannot save everyone, cannot protect every world, cannot intervene in every conflict where my power might shift outcomes. If I tried, I would become you, someone who decides where their authority extends based on convenience rather than principle." Steppenwolf had paused combat, walked toward the confrontation with leisurely confidence. His electro-axe rested against one shoulder. The ancient warrior radiated the satisfaction of someone watching enemies argue while he recovered strength. "How touching," he observed. "The Kryptonian begging for help, the god reduced to supplication, and the boundary maker lecturing about principles while worlds burn. Darkseid will appreciate the irony." He raised his axe. Energy gathered along the blade's edge, enough to vaporize whatever target he designated. "Last chance, boundary maker," Steppenwolf offered. "Join them in futile resistance or watch from your cage as I claim this world for my master. Either outcome satisfies me." Rimuru looked at Steppenwolf, at Superman, at Zeus, at the battlefield littered with bodies of people who had died because gods and super beings and cosmic tyrants could not coexist without violence. Made a decision. "I offer you one alternative, all of you. Superman, Zeus, Steppenwolf. Stop fighting." "Stop," Superman repeated. "We're defending Earth." "You are perpetuating conflict," Rimuru corrected. 16 hours of battle. How many dead? How much destroyed? And what have you accomplished except proving Steppenwolf's point that prolonged combat favors whoever conserves resources best? "What alternative do you propose?" Zeus demanded. "Sanctuary expands," Rimuru answered. "The boundary extends to encompass all combatants. Violence ceases for everyone. No exceptions. You negotiate from positions where force is not an option. Or you remain locked in stalemate until someone blinks." "You would neutralize us," Superman said slowly. "Remove our ability to defend Earth." "I would remove everyone's ability to attack," Rimuru clarified. "Defense and offense are different contexts of the same violence. The boundary recognizes no distinction. Inside all are equal. All are powerless to harm. All must negotiate as mortals rather than gods." "Unacceptable," Steppenwolf declared. "Apocalypse does not negotiate." "Then Apocalypse loses," Rimuru replied. "Because the alternative to negotiation is perpetual containment. You cannot conquer what you cannot touch. And I can maintain this boundary longer than you can maintain siege." Steppenwolf studied Rimuru. The ancient warrior's expression shifted from confidence to calculation. "You bluff," he said. "Maintaining a boundary this size would drain even cosmic tier entities." "Test it," Rimuru invited. "Spend weeks, months, years attempting to breach or outlast. Darkseid will be pleased when you report that Earth remains unconquered because you wasted resources on a siege you cannot win." The words landed. Steppenwolf's jaw tightened. Apocalypse did not tolerate failure, but it especially did not tolerate inefficiency. "Superman," Rimuru continued. "Zeus, you have 3 options. 1. Continue fighting until Steppenwolf grinds you down. 2. Accept my boundary expansion and negotiate. 3. Attempt to breach Sanctuary and discover whether your combined might suffices." "That's not a choice," Superman said. "That's surrender." "That is reality," Rimuru replied. "You cannot win this fight, not without me, and I will not fight your war. So you choose lose slowly through attrition or accept containment and negotiate from equal footing. Either way, the violence ends." Wonder Woman had approached during the exchange, listened with the focus of someone weighing options with tactical precision. "If we accept," she said, "what guarantees our safety? You could contain us indefinitely." "I could," Rimuru acknowledged. You would have to trust that my stated principle that sanctuary exists to protect agency, not impose control, is genuine. That trust is the price of ending this war without more death. Trust a stranger who refuses to fight beside us, Zeus said, who lectures about neutrality while hiding behind barriers. That is what you are, that is what you offer. Yes, because the alternative is death. Your Superman's everyone caught in crossfire. I offer survival without victory, peace without dominance, safety without superiority. If those terms are insufficient, then continue your war. I will watch from sanctuary and mourn what could have been prevented. Silence stretched. The only sound was distant fire and the mechanical hum of apocalyptic war machines holding position. Superman looked at his hands, at the blood-staining knuckles that should not bleed, at the tremor that came from pushing Kryptonian physiology past safe limits. He glanced at Wonder Woman, at Cyborg, at the Justice League members who had followed him into hell and were still standing only through sheer will. He observed at Zeus, at the god who represented everything Superman had fought to diminish divine authority, unquestioned power rule through fear disguised as blessing. And he made the hardest calculation of his life. Expand the boundary, Superman said. The words tasted like ash. End this. Zeus stared at him. You accept containment. I accept reality, Superman replied. We're losing. Sanctuary is the only option that doesn't end with Earth conquered or everyone dead. If that requires trusting someone who won't fight for us, then I trust. Weakness, Zeus spat. Survival, Superman corrected. You're welcome to keep fighting. I'm done. Steppenwolf laughed. The sound carried genuine amusement. The Kryptonian surrenders, he declared. Darkseid will find this most. The boundary expanded. Not slowly, not with warning. Rimuru had been holding the expansion ready, waiting only for consent. The dome grew in microseconds, swallowing battlefield combatants and war machines in a sphere of law that recognized no exceptions. Steppenwolf's electro-axe died mid-swing. The energy he had been gathering dispersed harmlessly. His enhanced strength reduced to baseline. The ancient warrior who had conquered 10,000 worlds stood holding a decorative blade that could not cut butter. Zeus's lightning vanished. His divine aspect collapsed like punctured balloon. The god who moments before had commanded storms now looked like an exceptionally fit elderly man, wearing elaborate costume. Superman felt his remaining solar energy plainly stop. Not drained, not depleted, just irrelevant. His strength, speed, invulnerability, all the powers that made him Superman, ceased to function. He was Clark Kent with extraordinary vulnerability and no idea how to be that person anymore. Every combatant experienced the same transformation. Powers neutralized, weapons decorative, violence impossible. They stood in the expanded sanctuary as something none had been in years. Equal. Steppenwolf recovered first. The ancient warrior possessed millennia of experience adapting to unexpected circumstances. He studied his powerless hands, glanced at Rimuru. Clever, he acknowledged. You waited for consent from one party, then imposed on all. Technically within your stated principles while achieving total control. Darkseid would appreciate the strategy. Superman consented to boundary expansion, Rimuru replied. I did not specify whose consent I required, only that I required it. You and Zeus chose to remain within range. That choice has consequences. Release us, Zeus demanded. Immediately. No, You cannot hold us indefinitely, Zeus insisted. I can, Rimuru replied, and will, until you accept that your war is over, that violence is no longer an available tool, that you must negotiate or remain contained. Steppenwolf assessed the situation with professional detachment, looked at the boundary that now imprisoned everyone, looked at Rimuru, made a calculation. I propose terms, he said. Apocalypse withdraws. Darkseid acknowledges Earth as contested territory requiring further consideration. In exchange, you release my forces and guarantee safe passage through boom tubes. Why would you withdraw? Superman asked. You could outlast this. Eventually, the boundary fails. Perhaps, Steppenwolf agreed. Or perhaps the boundary maker speaks truth about indefinite maintenance. Either way, Apocalypse does not waste resources on uncertain outcomes. Better to withdraw, reassess, return with strategies designed specifically for this opponent. Conquest delayed is not conquest denied. Rimuru considered this. Acceptable. But conditions you withdraw all forces immediately. You do not return for 1 Earth year. During that year, if Apocalypse violates neutrality by attacking this planet, I extend sanctuary to encompass whatever forces you send. Perpetually. Agreed, Steppenwolf said, without hesitation. A year meant nothing to Apocalypse. A year meant time to study this anomaly and return with appropriate countermeasures. Rimuru gestured. A section of the boundary opened. Boom tubes activated. Parademons and war machines filed through with disciplined efficiency. Within minutes, Apocalypse's entire invasion force had withdrawn. Steppenwolf paused at the portal's edge, glanced back at Rimuru. You are not what I expected, he said. Most beings with your power seek conquest. You seek what peace? Agency, Rimuru corrected. For myself and others, peace is only what occurs when agency is respected rather than violated. Quaint, Steppenwolf observed. We will see how long that philosophy survives contact with Darkseid. 1 year boundary maker. Enjoy it. He stepped through. The boom tube closed, leaving only Regime Olympus and refugees within Sanctuary's expanded reach. Zeus turned to Rimuru with barely contained fury. You dare contain gods, he said. Olympus will not tolerate. Olympus will negotiate, Rimuru interrupted. Or remain contained. Those are your options. Threats are meaningless when you cannot act on them. Release me and face divine wrath, Zeus warned. I offer you the same terms as Steppenwolf. Withdraw from Metropolis. Recognize Sanctuary as sovereign neutral ground. Do not attempt to recruit refugees or interfere with their choices. In exchange, I release you and guarantee non-intervention in Olympian affairs. Unacceptable, Zeus declared. Then you remain, Rimuru replied. I am content to maintain this boundary indefinitely. Are you content to exist without power for the same duration? Hera placed a hand on Zeus's arm, spoke quietly. Husband, we cannot win this through pride. The boundary maker has demonstrated superiority. Better to withdraw with dignity than remain imprisoned out of stubbornness. Zeus looked at her, at the other Olympians who stood powerless and diminished, at the fundamental reality that divine authority meant nothing when physics itself refused cooperation. 1 year, he said finally. Olympus withdraws for 1 year. Then we return. And if you still stand against us, we will find means to break your boundary. Accepted? The boundary opened. Divine light tore reality. Olympus departed with considerably less grandeur than they had arrived. Zeus's final glare carried promises of future reckoning. Then they were gone, leaving only regime forces and refugees within the silent court. Superman sat heavily on rubble. Without super strength, even that simple action revealed exhaustion. He glanced up at Rimuru. "What now?" he asked, genuinely uncertain. "Now you face what you have been avoiding for 4 years. The question of whether your regime serves people or controls them. Whether you built safety or cage. Whether anyone actually wanted what you forced them to accept." "I saved them," Superman said. "Gave them peace." "You gave them your version of peace," Rimuru replied, without asking if that was peace they wanted, without considering that safety purchased through fear is just slower dying. Wonder Woman stepped forward. "You're going to keep him contained? Us? The entire regime?" "Yes. For how long?" "Until Superman answers that question honestly," Rimuru replied. "The one he has been avoiding. If people only obey because they fear consequences, is that governance or coercion? And if it is coercion, when did he decide that was acceptable?" Superman examined at his hands, at the absence of power, at the vulnerability he had not experienced since arriving on Earth. He thought about Lois, about the Joker, about the moment when the world broke and he had decided that broken things required force to fix. He thought about 4 years of making people safe, whether they wanted it or not. Of crushing resistance because resistance meant chaos. Of building peace on foundation of fear and calling it justice. He looked at Rimuru. "It was coercion," he said quietly. "From the beginning. I told myself it was necessary. That the alternative was worse. That my intentions justified my methods. But it was always coercion. I just couldn't admit that admitting it meant everything I'd done was wrong." The admission hung in the air. Raw, honest. The first crack in 4 years of absolute conviction. Good. That is the beginning of wisdom, acknowledging what you became. "What happens now?" Superman asked. "Now you remain contained until you are no longer a threat. Until the regime dissolves. Until people can choose their governance without fear of heat vision or super speed execution. Until Earth remembers what freedom without Superman's protection feels like." "You're sealing me," Superman realized. "I am removing you from the equation," Rimuru confirmed, "so that others may choose without your shadow. It is not punishment. It is necessity. You cannot stop being Superman while remaining Superman." Superman nodded slowly, understanding settling like weight. "How long?" he asked. "Until you are ready," Rimuru replied. "Or until circumstances change. Whichever comes first." The boundary contracted, slowly this time, drawing inward until it encompassed only Sanctuary's original perimeter plus a small expansion that held Superman, Wonder Woman, and core regime leadership. The rest of the Justice League found themselves outside. Powers restored. Free to leave. Most did. Without Superman, the regime had no center, no absolute authority. Within hours, it would begin fragmenting. Within Sanctuary, Superman sat in the crater's center, powerless, contained, facing the question he had avoided for 4 years. Who was Clark Kent when he could not be Superman? And if he found an answer, would it matter? 3 weeks after the Silent Court, Earth learned to breathe again. The regime collapsed faster than anyone anticipated. Without Superman's absolute authority, without the fear of heat vision or super-speed execution, the infrastructure of control plainly dissolved. Soldiers abandoned posts. Administrators fled. The machinery of tyranny revealed itself as exactly that machinery that stopped functioning the moment its operator was removed. Some regions descended into chaos. Old grudges resurfaced. Territories that had been forced into cooperation under threat of Superman's intervention now fought over resources, borders, ancient grievances that 4 years of imposed peace had merely frozen rather than resolved. Other areas discovered something unexpected. They did not need a God King to function. Local governments reformed. Communities organized. People who had been treated as subjects remembered how to be citizens. The transition was messy, painful, frequently violent, but it was theirs. Batman watched this unfold from the shadows he had never left. The insurgency had won, technically. Superman was contained. The regime destroyed. Everything Bruce Wayne had fought for had been achieved. He felt no triumph, only exhaustion and the weight of costs he could never repay. He found Rimuru at Sanctuary's edge where the boundary had become permanent fixture. The crater had transformed. Refugees who had chosen to stay built structures, planted gardens, created something that glanced less like survival camp and more like actual community. "You won," Batman said without preamble. "No one won," Rimuru replied. "Outcomes occurred. Some better than alternatives, some worse. Victory implies clean resolution. This is merely different circumstances. Superman is contained. The regime is broken. Apocalypse and Olympus withdrew. Those are victories. Superman is imprisoned by someone he cannot challenge," Rimuru countered. "The regime collapsed into chaos that is killing people daily. Apocalypse and Olympus will return with strategies specifically designed to counter me. And Sanctuary has become exactly what I hoped to avoid, a power that others fear, because they cannot control it." Batman processed this. "You regret what you did." "I regret that it was necessary," Rimuru clarified. "Superman forced a choice between his tyranny and mine. I chose mine because at least I understand its costs. But make no mistake, sealing him was an act of power imposing will. I plainly convinced everyone, including myself, that the imposition was justified." "Was it?" Batman asked. "Justified?" "I don't know," Rimuru admitted. "Ask me in a year when Apocalypse returns, or when the chaos from regime collapse settles into new tyrannies, or when someone realizes that whoever controls me controls ultimate veto power over violence. The answer may change based on consequences I cannot predict." They stood in silence. Two people who had ended a war understanding that endings were just transformations into different problems. "What happens to Superman?" Batman asked finally. "That depends on him inside Sanctuary's containment zone." Clark Kent sat on rubble and tried to remember who he had been before the cape. It was harder than he expected. 30 years as Superman had worn grooves so deep that thinking outside them felt like learning a foreign language. How did normal people process threat without calculating how to neutralize it? How did they accept uncertainty without imposing order? How did they live knowing they could not prevent every tragedy? Wonder Woman sat nearby. She had chosen to remain in containment voluntarily. Could have left when Rimuru offered. Stayed because, as she put it, someone should witness what became of gods who forgot they were fallible. "How long will you keep us here?" she asked Rimuru during one of the Boundary Maker's periodic visits. Until it is safe to release you, Rimuru replied. Or until you demonstrate that containment is no longer necessary. What would that demonstration look like? I don't know, Rimuru admitted. Superman spent 4 years convinced his methods were necessary. That conviction does not evaporate because he spoke one honest sentence. Real change requires sustained reconstruction of fundamental assumptions. How long that takes varies. Clark glanced up at that. You sound like you've done this before. Contained someone until they changed. I contained myself. Once. For a very long time. Until I could be trusted with the power I possessed. It was unpleasant. But necessary. How long? Clark asked. Centuries, Rimuru replied. I do not expect you to require that duration. But I also will not release you prematurely because containment is uncomfortable. Some lessons cannot be rushed. Clark absorbed this. Centuries. The idea that his redemption might take longer than the regime had existed was sobering. What if I never change? He asked. What if this is who I am now? Then you remain contained. Rimuru said only, and Earth learns to function without Superman. Which may be the kindest outcome I can offer a world that does not need saving by those who cannot stop saving it. Across Sanctuary, Elena worked with other refugees to expand the gardens. 3 weeks of planting had yielded first harvests. Not enough to sustain 1,200 people indefinitely, but enough to demonstrate self-sufficiency was possible. Eli helped when he could. The boy moved through Sanctuary like ghost, silent, always watching. Mara's death had carved something out of him that 3 weeks had not refilled. He did not cry, did not speak about it, just existed in the space between grief and whatever came after. Elena found him sitting where Mara had fallen. The bloodstain had long since washed away. But Eli knew the exact spot. Your mother chose to save you, Elena said. That choice mattered. You matter. Eli said nothing, just stared at the ground where his mother had bled out, protecting him from violence that was not supposed to exist here. You're angry at Rimuru, Elena observed, for not saving her. The boy finally glanced at her. His eyes held something too old for 3 years. Mom said no, Eli said. First words in days. Rimuru asked. Mom said no. So it's not their fault? Elena's breath caught. The boy understood. At 3 years old, he understood the concept of consent better than most adults. Then who are you angry at? She asked gently. Everyone else, Eli said. Superman, the gods, the bad people who hurt her, everyone who made the world so broken that Mom had to choose. Elena pulled him close. He did not resist, did not cry, just accepted the comfort with the exhausted resignation of someone who understood that some wounds never fully healed. Your anger is fair, she told him. The world is broken. People with power broke it. And now we have to decide whether to fix it or just survive in the wreckage. Your mother chose to fix it by choosing Sanctuary, by choosing you. That legacy is yours now. What if I can't? Eli whispered. What if I am too small? Then you grow, Elena said. And while you grow, we hold the space your mother died protecting, until you're ready to decide what to do with it. In the shadows between worlds, Ares watched Sanctuary with calculation that had shifted from triumph to reassessment. His plan had worked, sort of. War had come to Metropolis. Factions had clashed. Blood had been spilled. The escalation he had carefully orchestrated had reached its crescendo. But the resolution was wrong. Rimuru had not broken, had not become tyrant, had not embraced violence as necessary tool. Instead, the Boundary Maker had contained all violence, imposed peace through power so absolute that conflict only ceased to be possible. That was not war. That was its opposite. The complete absence of struggle. The end of conflict through overwhelming force, applied with surgical precision. Ares hated it. But he also recognized when a strategy had failed, when further escalation would just feed his opponent's strength. Rimuru thrived on being pushed. Each challenge had made the boundaries stronger, more comprehensive, harder to breach. So Ares made a decision rarely associated with the god of war. He withdrew, not permanently. War always returned. Conflict was fundamental to existence. But for now, while Rimuru held Metropolis in stalemate and Superman sat powerless contemplating his failures, there were other worlds, other conflicts, other opportunities to prove that violence was not optional, but inevitable. He would return to Earth, eventually, when Sanctuary had grown complacent, when Rimuru's principles had been tested past breaking, when the one-year deadline approached and Apocalypse or Olympus found the weakness he had failed to exploit. War could wait. It had waited through empires and ages. It would wait through this, too. Diablo materialized beside Rimuru as the blue-haired figure stood at Sanctuary's boundary, watching sunset paint the ruins bronze. Ares has withdrawn, Diablo reported. His proxies dissolved, his infrastructure abandoned. The god of war has decided this battlefield offers diminishing returns. For now, Rimuru said. For now, Diablo agreed. Though I suspect he will return with more sophisticated approach. Direct manipulation failed. Next time he will be subtler. Let him. We adapt. That is what Sanctuary is, perpetual adaptation. Each challenge makes us refine the boundary. Each attack teaches us new vulnerabilities to address. Ares did us a service ultimately, forced us to become what we needed to be. At what cost? Diablo asked. Mara, the others who died in breaches and battles, the refugees who live with trauma, Superman imprisoned. The regime's collapse creating new conflicts. These are not small prices. No, Rimuru acknowledged. They are not. And I carry every one. But the alternative, letting Superman's regime continue, letting Apocalypse conquer, letting Olympus reimpose divine rule, those costs would have been higher. Different, but higher. You sound uncertain, Diablo observed. I am, Rimuru admitted. Certainty is what made Superman dangerous, what makes every tyrant dangerous. The belief that their way is correct, that their power justifies their methods, that outcomes will vindicate choices. I refuse that certainty, even when it makes decisions harder. They stood in silence as the sun finished setting. Metropolis lay broken, but breathing, rebuilding slowly, messily, without Superman's imposed order or anyone else's absolute authority. What happens when the year expires? Diablo asked. When Apocalypse and Olympus return, we negotiate, or fight, or contain them again, whatever circumstances require. The boundary holds. That is the only certainty I claim. And Superman? Superman decides his own fate, Rimuru replied. I can contain him, cannot force him to change. That work is his alone. Batman approached from shadows that had hidden him perfectly, despite standing 10 feet away. The dark night had a gift for that, existing in plain sight while remaining undetected. "The insurgency is dissolving," he reported. "Without the regime to fight, we have no purpose. People are returning to their lives, or trying to. Some regions are forming new governments, others are descending into warlordism. It's complicated." "Freedom usually is," Rimuru explained. Superman offered simple answers: obey or face consequences. People who lived under that for 4 years forgot how to navigate complexity. They will remember. It will take time. "What about you?" Batman asked. "What's Sanctuary's purpose now? Apocalypse and Olympus are gone. Superman is contained. The crisis is over." "The crisis is never over," Rimuru replied. "Only transformed. Sanctuary remains what it has always been, a space where violence does not function, where people can choose without fear of superpowered intervention. Whether that space is needed for refugees or for containing those too dangerous to release, or for demonstrating that peace without dominance is possible, we adapt." "You've made yourself Earth's jailer," Batman observed. "The one who decides who is too dangerous to be free. That's a lot of power." "Yes," Rimuru agreed. "Which is why I need you, and others like you. People who will watch, who will question, who will prepare to stop me if I become what Superman became. I cannot check myself alone. Power without accountability is tyranny, even mine." Batman studied Rimuru. The admission was genuine. The blue-haired figure was inviting oversight, requesting limitation, acknowledging that absolute power corrupted absolutely even when wielded with best intentions. "I'll watch," Batman said. "And the moment you cross the line, the moment Sanctuary becomes cage instead of shelter, I'll act." "Good. That is exactly what I need." They stood together, watching Sanctuary's lights come on as evening deepened. 1,200 people who had chosen uncertain freedom over guaranteed safety, who had voted to maintain neutrality even facing death, who were building something new from the ashes of Superman's certainty. It was not perfect, was not clean, was definitely not heroic in the traditional sense, but it was theirs. Inside the containment zone, Clark Kent sat under stars. He could see clearly for the first time in years. Without supervision, enhancing everything. Without the constant sensory input of being Superman, the universe looked smaller, more manageable, almost peaceful. Wonder Woman joined him. They sat in companionable silence, two gods learning to be mortal, two warriors learning to be still. "Do you think we'll ever leave here?" Diana asked. "I don't know," Clark admitted. "Maybe. If I figure out who Clark Kent is without the cape. If I can be trusted with power again. If..." He trailed off. "If we deserve it," Diana finished. "That's what you were going to say?" "Yes," Clark said. "Then we work toward deserving it," Diana said. "However long that takes, whatever form that takes, we became what we fought against. Admitting that is the beginning. Understanding why is the work." Clark nodded. It was not comfort, not absolution, just acknowledgement that the road ahead was long and uncertain and would require confronting truths he had spent 4 years avoiding. But for the first time since Lois died, he felt something other than rage or grief or desperate need to control an uncontrollable world. He felt possibility. Rimuru walked Sanctuary's perimeter as night settled fully, checked the boundary, confirmed its integrity, made small adjustments based on data CL provided about stress patterns and potential vulnerabilities. "Analysis complete," CL reported. "Sanctuary is stable. resource sustainability approaching viability, social cohesion improving, threat assessment low for immediate future. However, long-term projections remain uncertain. Apocalypse and Olympus will return. New threats will emerge. The boundary will be tested again. I know, Rimuru thought back. This was never meant to be permanent solution, just demonstration that alternatives exist, that power can be wielded without dominance, that peace is possible without tyranny. And when the demonstration ends, when Sanctuary must either expand to protect Earth or contract to protect itself, then we make another impossible choice, Rimuru responded, and hope that our principles survive the decision. That is all we can do. Maintain consistency, respect agency, refuse certainty, and accept that sometimes the right choice still costs more than we want to pay. The boundary pulsed. Steady, absolute. A wall of law between violence and peace, between chaos and order, between Superman's world and the one Rimuru offered as alternative. It would not last forever. Nothing did. But for now, it held. And that was enough. Somewhere beyond the boundary in the ruins of Metropolis that were slowly becoming city again, people slept without checking for threats, made plans beyond tomorrow, argued about governance without fear of heat vision, remembered what it meant to be citizens instead of subjects. It was messy. It was uncertain. It was frequently violent in ways the regime had prevented. But it was theirs to navigate. And in the end, that was what Sanctuary had always been about. Not providing answers, not imposing peace, not becoming another power that decided what others needed. Just holding space where people could choose. Even when those choices were wrong, even when they led to suffering. Even when every instinct screamed to intervene and fix and impose the order that superior power made possible. Because the alternative, Superman's alternative, Zeus's alternative, Darkseid's alternative, was a world where power always determined right. And Rimuru had seen too many worlds die under that philosophy to let it stand unchallenged. The price of peace was eternal vigilance. The price of freedom was accepting that others might use it badly. The price of power was the constant choice to restrain it. Rimuru paid those prices, would continue paying them, for as long as necessary, because someone had to demonstrate that strength did not require dominance, that safety did not require submission, that peace was possible without tyranny, even if that demonstration took centuries, even if it never convinced everyone, even if the only victory was proving that alternatives existed. The boundary held. And for now, that was enough. The arrival of Rimuru Tempest fundamentally rewrote the rules of the Injustice Universe rules that had remained unchallenged for 4 long years. In a world conditioned to believe that absolute power equaled justice from Superman's authoritarian regime, to the God-scorching authority of Olympus Sanctuary, emerged as a quiet revolution. Rimuru did not defeat Superman through violence. Instead, he forced the Man of Steel to confront the truth the regime had buried for years, that Superman's so-called protection was nothing more than coercion in a different form. Sanctuary also halted the expansion of both Apocalypse and Olympus, creating space for peace and granting humanity something it had been denied: genuine freedom of choice. In a universe where gods and heroes resolve every conflict through overwhelming force, Sanctuary stands as a final light at the end of a tunnel filled with darkness, violence, and cruelty.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notification so you won't miss our future video. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.